going live right now. And so anyway, yeah. So no, I'd move to Portland. Welcome to Lovecraft eZine podcast at a very special time. This is a very special episode, and I hope you guys are gonna learn some life lessons along the way. We probably won't have the live audience that we usually get, but that's okay because most of the audience comes from the audio on iTunes and Spotify and so forth. So anyway, yeah, I don't know, on iTunes, Laird, I might have read a little bit of the audio's work. The Pacific Northwest might be a little ruined for me.
In what way?
It just, there's some creepy shit up there, man. I don't know.
That's true. But I left, so it's less so.
Right.
Oh, okay. Right. Yeah. Well, I should mention for those listening later and can't see our faces, I'm Mike Davis, Philip Fracassi's here, Cody Goodfellow's here, and Laird Barron is here. So, hey guys.
Hey.
How do you do? Mike.
Yeah. What are we going to talk about? Are we going to talk about you guys' books?
Yeah, I was going to say I haven't said hello to Laird yet because I just popped back in after heating up my coffee.
You should say hello to Laird.
I just did. Did you hear me?
Have you been pumping iron? You look like your biceps look bigger to me. Are you wearing a kid's t-shirt?
No, this is a t-shirt I got from a TV show that I worked on. So I only wear stuff that people give me for free. So it's either a Ubisoft shirt or it's a production shirt from some TV show I did that nobody ever watched.
But the nice part is the biceps are sewn into the sleeves. So
yeah, no, I was gonna say prosthetics or no.
Now you guys are making me super self-conscious, so I'm just gonna.
As he tightens his shirt down even more. No.
Turns off as Philip turns off his video.
He casually flexes every muscle. He casually flexes every muscle on his body.
Philip's like, I didn't want to say I was more man than you guys, but I am. You know.
I was missing that. Laird's hair is much longer from the last time I saw him, and Cody's hair is much shorter, so it's a little bit of a.
The universe is imbalanced. That's what's happening.
Yeah, a little bit of an imbalance. Yeah.
But you know what? You guys both look. I just want to say you look beautiful, just the way that you are. Don't let anyone
today
tell you
right now.
Yeah. Wow. Maybe if I pull on mine, his will get shorter.
Maybe
if you shave your head, Laird's will get longer.
Yeah. It takes work. Listen, it takes work to shave your head. I admire Cody. I used to go back in my 20s when I was in the Pacific Northwest. I shaved my head all the time, and it is a lot less effort just to let it grow.
Yeah. Did you have a lot of really great hats though?
No.
I
had one hat. But I'd grown my hair back out and had a beard and the whole 9 yards. No, I just walked around Telly Savalas style.
Right.
And in the summer, my head was nice and tan. In the wintertime, you could turn out the lights and the tiny bit of light coming in through the attic would, light the whole room, reflective light.
But did you go beard and shave head, Laird, or?
I actually had a beard. I'll tell you what, a lot of people early in my career knew me from, I had a beard back in those days, a big one. I had one and then I shaved it, and I started shaving my beard completely off about 11 years ago. But I had one last week. So
how do you shave your own head? I've never done this.
It hurts. Yeah. I used to do it with a Bic razor, and that wasn't very good, but whatever.
Wow.
It hurt.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Next thing, I would use electronics.
I do.
I take it you're not allowing Jessica to cut your hair.
She doesn't. She just doesn't want me to have she just doesn't like the beard.
Oh, okay.
And so, you know what? She doesn't put anything on me about anything except the beard. She's like, I just really don't like that. I was like, no problem.
My wife's the opposite. She doesn't like me without the beard.
So, right.
Or at least the goatee.
That might have something. Well, I don't know.
Interesting.
Speculate.
Excuse me, Laird?
I was going to say something. It might be something to do with your face. I don't know.
It could be. In fact, you're probably right.
My dad used to grow a beard because he didn't like his chin. So anyway, we should move on.
Yeah.
Should we? I mean, I feel like we've accomplished everything we need to accomplish here today.
He pulls.
This is what I came, guys. This is what I came for. I don't know what else we're supposed to be talking about. This is what
we do have several people watching. Wow, we got a lot more than I thought. For a Friday.
Style tips with Laird and Cody and Phil and Mike. Come on,
Bart. Speaking of style tips and long hair, Bartlett's watching live. So
is his hair growing out?
I think he's got a beard
hair
right
goes
now.
all over the place too.
Yeah.
Right.
Every time I see a picture of Matthew, he looks different. Like his hair, it's kind of like Cody. Like his hair is like really long.
That's what I
or
mean.
really
You can't
short,
keep
or he
up
has a
with the
beard, or he has
look.
no beard.
Yeah,
Mm-mm.
exactly.
He's feverishly applying some cursed beard oil that he bought at a haunted tag sale a little earlier today.
But he makes it work. I mean, you
Probably.
take one look at that guy and you're like, that guy's a writer. That guy is a writer. You know?
And a creepy
Yeah, you
one.
see Matthew on the street, and you know he's a horror writer. Just walking past him, I bet.
And you
He's
cross
a
the
vibe.
street, maybe.
I wouldn't, but most people might. Yeah.
No, yeah, he's a really nice guy. People are like,
He's okay.
people that don't know who Matthew Bartlett is, the 1% out there are going, who is this guy? Should I avoid him? No, you should read his books.
That's right.
You should read his books.
Yes, look up Matthew Bartlett.
Laird just
Amazon
posted a photo
or
with
Google.
Bartlett from, where was that from, Laird? That was like a memory photo that you just posted today. I saw. It was really cool.
So what?
Was it
You know, I think
convention?
I shared it. It was
Yeah.
So it just popped up, but it was from, I believe, Nikon, which just ended. This year's Nikon just ended. It was the virtual Nikon.
Mhm.
That's just a quick shout out. Bartlett goes there. A lot of people. That's one of my favorite conventions. I'm hoping to do it next year. We'll see what's if we're still here. But I like it, and a lot of nice writers go there. It's one of the most relaxed conventions you can go to as a writer or a fan. Just
If
mingle
we're
with
still
people.
here, I like our chances a lot better than the last 4 years.
Yeah.
I think we'll still.
Oh, look at that! Beneath the pale sky.
Yeah.
Mm.
I'm trying to.
I don't think I'm
trying to pretend I'm a professional. You know.
Good job.
Yeah, and the Flying Nun is on the other side, so couldn't quite get the titles in, but
Those are some
yeah.
good looking covers.
Mm-hmm.
Both of them are really nice, I think.
Yes, the Flying Nun spoke to me. It was everything about religion that I agreed with and more. So,
Wow,
that was a great book. I loved it.
Oh, thanks.
And I highlighted a bunch of stuff in it because I had a Kindle copy. So that's how you know I really love a book, because I'm highlighting shit. So, well, we don't have to do David Copperfield or anything. I Am Born. We could probably skip ahead a little bit. Why don't you know what, Laird? Why don't you ask, if you're okay with this?
Mhm.
Ask Philip a few questions. Well, no, wait a minute. You only have an hour, right, Cody?
Actually, I have a little bit more time. I can go as long as 90 minutes. I got on a later, better looking flight. So yeah.
Oh, by then I'll be ready for.
But if you want to start, okay, I was gonna say if you want to start with them, it's fine. But what do you want to do?
No, I don't have to bug out.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I want to. Yeah, let's start with Laird and Laird. I know you're a big admirer of both of these guys' work.
I am.
And you've read a lot of Philip Fracassi books, if not all. Philip's latest. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead,
No,
finish what
you're
saying.
fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say his two latest, I think, are Commodore and Beneath the Pale Sky. So
Right. First, I just start with a comment. I've been following Cody's work, and I've known Cody off and on since the early aughts. We probably didn't meet until close to the mid or late aughts, but I've been following his work since I kind of was first on the scene with Ravenous Dusk and Radiant Dawn, were my introduction to his work. And of course, the reason I kind of want to make a comment is these are two really great authors that you have on the show today. And yet, and they both, I would say, have done a lot of work in the weird fiction community, weird fiction field and the horror field, and yet really different, completely different. Once again, I think like these are two writers that sort of accentuate what's possible within this spectrum of a very, a small niche of genre or even literature in general. Weird fiction and horror are much smaller than some of the other categories, and yet even within the kind of the weird end of it, they are so different. How their themes, how they execute those themes, the vehicles that they use, their styles. Just to toss it out there, I was thinking about this right before we came on. I would never damn Cody by trying to actually even pigeonhole what he does, because his work is sort of mercurial. It kind of changes over time. I mean, it's always Cody It always has sort of defining characteristics of his thought process, but he writes political absurdism or satire. He writes straight up, I want to say homage to Lovecraft. That's kind of like early stuff, or cosmic horror. And while it's always informed by his, like I said, by his politics, his philosophy, his ideology, it really, there's a lot of change over, I guess, as you would expect over, 17 to 20 year publishing career so far that I'm aware of. And so I guess part of that is, if you're around long enough and you're savvy, you're going to evolve. But I find that fascinating. And then you have, and he's sort of like, I would say, almost like a mad poet. Sometimes it would be if I were going to be glib and just say, hey, this is a cool way to describe his writing. He's like a mad poet. The love of language, the love of ideas. There's like a punk aesthetic there, or a beat aesthetic there. Not going to sell out. If something gains more traction commercially, great. But I'm writing my stories. These are the stories I'm going to tell. It's up to you what you do with them. That's a very marked contrast with Phil, whom I've known for a few years now, and I've worked with him and a big admirer of his work, big booster, who is someone who takes the traditional arcs of literature and can kind of like takes that the straitjacket of form and says, no, I'm going to do this with it or that with it. Like I've said several times, I find that his mastery of structure, narrative structure, is probably unparalleled. He understands intuitively, and I think through having written a lot of screenplays, etc., how story works. And he has a dynamic range too, because some of his stuff is completely out there. Other pieces that he's done are very commercial or very accessible, and everything in between. And so I find that the contrast between their styles, and yet they're here with us in the weird community is really affecting to me.
Jeff just said exactly what I was thinking. Jeff Thomas is watching live as well. And he said, great. This is a great overview of Cody's work. And then as you continued, and now Phillips. So, I don't know what I'm doing here, but you.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I don't mean to.
I'm loving this, man.
Okay.
The less I have to talk, I love it.
Jeff Thomas, since you just profaned the airways with his name, is another one. I started reading him almost probably the same year I started reading Cody. I'm trying to remember. It was Godhead dying downward or earthward. It was just this really crazy stuff that reminded me. Actually, I started reading him before Jeff Vandermeer, but there's like some overlap in some of that organic science or bioscience and just this crazy stuff they were doing. And there's another guy who can write extremely traditional 3-act narrative or 7-act narrative, or just completely go off into the hinterlands, and you're going to have to find your own way back. So no, this is cool.
Yeah, and by the way, Jeff Thomas's books, his Pumptown books. I think it's a 5 series. That's right. It is available right now on Kindle Unlimited. Speaking to the audience, so if you haven't read all the Pumptown books, or you don't know what Pumptown is, it's literally indescribable. So not literally, but it's very indescribable. It's amazing.
He is. He's a great author, and I think
read
not
those.
Just weird fiction, but horror. And his latest, the American, is a really that's a dark journey. I felt like it sort of it reminds me of Brady Snellis's I can't get it. It's on the tip of my tongue. American Psycho, except it's its own thing. But it hit me like that. It was just like a punch in the face. But I do have a question for Cody, if I may.
Of course.
Now, Cody, you live in San Diego now, but you've also lived in LA. So you've been in California off and on for a while.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Michael Shea.
Oh God. Yeah.
Right. I seem to remember we were having drinks or something. I think we've talked about Michael Shea before.
Yeah.
I want to say it was like San Jose or something. We were at World Fantasy together one time and we were chatting.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. You and me and Langan and and Lynn and Michael were hanging out.
Yep, that's
down
right,
the
because that
Lexington bit.
was right. Michael was there.
I think Jared
I
Walter
told you
maybe.
guys before
Yeah.
the show started not to mention that name. Here,
Which one?
Langan.
Oh well, I wasn't sorry. I won't do it again.
Okay. Another great writer, The Fisherman, great cosmic horror book. Anyway, go on.
Well, all I was just going to say is that one of the things I started reading Shea. I didn't know who he was. I read him in the 80s, and I think my first exposure to him was Dark Descent. The anthology. And
Right.
I remember old Hartwell was talking about what an underappreciated writer he was, and so I read The Autopsy. And then as years went by, I finally got a hold of Polyphemus, and I'm just going, this guy's incredible. But one of the things that was incredible about him are his personification of California.
Yeah.
Not just the wilderness, because he was very much into hiking and outdoorsy kind of stuff. And then of course he had rural settings for some of his stories, but also the cities, San Francisco, LA, whatever. Well, I look at you and and the point was, I actually went and visited him that year. I stayed at their house with him and Linda. And I remember when I was coming down through the valley and we landed at Charles Schultz Airport, and I was riding out through wine country to his house where I guess they've been living for decades. I looked around and I'm going, because I had been to LA, I had been to San Francisco, but I'd never been out in the country at all. And I went, oh, I can see it. Just within 10 minutes, I'm looking at going, this is no wonder it was evocative of how he wrote, or vice versa. Does the landscape have an effect on you, or the cityscape of California? Have they really impacted your writing in any way?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. A sense of place and how the atmosphere, the influence that the atmosphere exerts on us is paramount in my stuff. And California, which is kind of, it's the environment of the whole world jigsawed together. I mean, you can get almost every conceivable extreme within a day's drive of where I was born and raised. But as with Michael's stuff and Michael, like Michael's Copping Squid stories have such a beautiful evocation of San Francisco, and that's unique nature. What sets it apart from any other city? It doesn't just feel like generic dark cityscape. Or in my own work, I like with Radiant Dawn and Ravenous Dusk, I used Death Valley and the extreme inimical nature of that environment. I mean, the place wants to kill you, and I've screwed up and almost died there. And the contrast that with these really strange, unearthly human landscapes like Colma, south of San Francisco, which is a necropolis. In the early 20th century in San Francisco, the city had already grown so quickly and was so overpopulated that they rezoned all of the cemeteries out. And so they mass exhumed all of the graves and created this complex of cemeteries south of San Francisco. And there are far more dead people than live people there. And there's all the businesses are florists and funeral, cremation repository showrooms and stuff like that.
I think there's actually a fictional novel about that. It might be Necropolis, but
at least, there's at least one, and it's a.
And also, I'm sorry, but I love shouting out from the nice comments to the panels or to the guests. Robin Chang, one of my regulars, says Cody's Cthulhu San Francisco source book is outstanding, being a native San Franciscan. So,
thank you.
Anyway,
I was living in San Francisco when I worked on that, and just went through a lot of shoe leather investigating that place, and that's a good one to key into this this conversation, because when you grow up in an environment, it becomes your visual and emotional landscape. Like whenever I have like those kind of deep dreams where I'm dealing with a lot of stuff and trying to work things out, the metaphor for that is I'm lost in Balboa Park. in San Diego, which is it's a vast park with a museum complex and a long Prado and statuary, and it has a lot of like mission era landscapes. Most of it was created for a World's Fair in the early 20th century by the same guy who did Golden Gate Park. And so, that landscape, even when I'm far away from it, it still informs my imagination, and it still informs how I reflect mentally. It's fascinating too when you first go to a place that you have only read about in books, or that, so that your first experience of it has like an overlay of the author's description. I mean, that was how it felt to me the first time I went to Olympia, after reading Laird's Imago sequence stories. And it really did, I really did feel in a way like I'd stepped into one of his stories. And that's the kind of effect that I like to bring to my readers, that I like to do to pay back the influences of the places that shaped me and made me who I am.
That's awesome, man. I love that. That's just wonderful. And that's how I felt. You more eloquently than I could think of hit that when I jumped off that airplane and was in Shay's territory. I did. I felt like I'm waiting for Uncle Tug to come pick me up, not not Michael Shay.
Right.
But well, I was just going to ask you. So you said you were raised in California. You've lived a lot of your life in various places in California, and you've also lived in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah.
Could you talk just for a minute about the juxtaposition? Because I don't know where all you've lived in the Northwest, but what about the juxtaposition about writing about the Northwest, writing about California?
That's a fascinating question. I had always almost all of my stories up until 2015 were set in, whether it was a key element in the plot or whether it was just in the background, in Southern California, maybe up through the Bay Area. I've lived in San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Marin County, Santa Cruz, San Jose, and then when I moved to Portland, there was, just as there'd been a polar shift in all of the assumptions and processes in my life, there was a real sea change in the kinds of stories that I found and the way that I related them. And a big part of that was having seasons, which I was not used to. When California was booming in the late 19th century, there was a lot of talk about how the lack of seasons was part of what drove people insane, and made everybody here so weird. Of course, it was just that all the weird people came there because it offered an opportunity to reinvent themselves. But the procession of the seasons and the fact that winter is not just a mild inconvenience, it's a potentially lethal warning to go inside and work on your stuff. It really changed my life cycle, and it changed how I reflected, and it made the environment much more of a factor in my stories. And there's a lot. I also noticed just a lot more internal depth added to my characters as a result. Part of the unconscious themes of what I relate in a lot of my California stories that I only really notice by comparison is how kind of facile and surface, almost just flat lizard brain characters I was creating and populating my stories with then. Whereas once I was up here, and I think I had to become a more self-reflective person, it added a lot more depth to my characters. Not that people in Southern California don't have that, but it's interesting what you perceive and what you find yourself putting in, the assumptions that you're making, even in a work where you are minutely, you're pulling this whole vision through a keyhole, essentially one word at a time. And so it is kind of fascinating, the things that still come in there without your being aware of it. But that was a big thing that I hadn't noticed before, that I found myself doing as a pattern. And now that I'm back in Southern California, they're all flat psychotic lizard brains again.
That's really a fascinating. It's a great question from Laird, and it's a really fascinating answer.
Yeah.
Because I first.
Thanks, Laird.
I first noticed it at the age of 6. Originally from Texas, we moved to Iowa when I was 6. And then I mentioned this in an introduction to a book I edited, that it's Halloween night and I go outside and it's Iowa, into October, and it's actually chilly and there's like fog in the air. And I'm like, wow, this is great. It's usually hot on Halloween in Texas. So yeah.
It's a mind fuck actually. But
Yeah.
just one comment about Cody's answer, that one section where you were talking about that they claim that the lack of seasons drive people insane in California or Southern California, and that I was laughing because in Alaska it's the polar opposite. All the seasons kill you. The different seasons are what murders minds there. So I don't think it's wrong. I actually think that we are quite affected biochemically by where we are, electromagnetically. Who knows? All these different things. But I do think it's fascinating, though. You've lived in these different places. Because I have found that it takes a while for an area to claim ownership over me. I've been in New York for about 11 years now, and I started immediately writing some New York set stories, but it took at least 6-7 years for me to feel like I could. And I felt that way when I lived in Washington State. It took me a little while to feel like I was comfortable writing about Washington State. So do you ever feel that way? Has it ever hit you that way?
Oh, sure. I'll have ideas for stories that I'm not ready to do yet. Or I feel like I need to absorb more. I often I mean, like moving up to Portland, it hit me pretty fast. I almost immediately pivoted to writing Pacific Northwestern flavored stories. I've been slower to adapt and reacquire Southern California stories. I've written a couple, but they feel dysfunctional. It feels like I don't really have a grasp on where I am yet. The place in San Diego I'm living completely defies any and every expectation of what you'd think. Oh, he lives in San Diego, so he's probably pretty close to the beach, and it's probably pretty liberal, except for all the ex-military and stuff. But I live in this weird wrinkle in a valley called Lakeside. That's like a defiant slice of Oklahoma. I mean, everybody still has corrals in their yard, although nobody has been able to afford a horse for at least a couple generations. And there's a rodeo there that's like a huge that's like that's the milestone of the calendar. And the queen of the rodeo is it's like an annual office, and a friend of mine's daughter was the queen of the rodeo for a while. And you'd be like, hey, you need free tickets to the fair, you need this, you need that. She's it's almost unconsciously pagan that she's kind of the totem. And I was like kidding him that, yeah, I mean, it's been pretty dry. They might have to burn her at the stake for a propitious harvest. So it's, yeah, it is really weird. And it's really, what's really strange to me is, or that dislocates my whole thing, is when I write a book or a big project that is set in a place that I've never been to. The last novel that I finished was a historical science fiction novel set in an alternate 1930s. The bulk of it takes place in New York, and I've been to New York a few times, and it had that New York and London and a couple other cities exerted like the thing where it just warps your brain chemistry, and it just gets all this oxytocin and adrenaline pumping, and you're up for days, and like the city is almost like a drug. I've experienced that with New York, but never stayed there long enough to absorb the actual rhythms of it. So I was reading like the 1937 WPA guide and a lot of memoirs and a lot of history books and things like that, but I wasn't really there. And writing a long project set in a place that you haven't been, or a place that's completely of your imagination, I have to imagine that if place informs your mindset and the kind of stories that you tell, that the lack of it, or the having to contrive a location, I think must exert, if not an opposite reaction. I don't know. Do you? I mean, Laird, your stuff is very much informed by a sense of place. Have you ever written a sustained thing in a place that you've never been?
Yes.
Yeah.
And
how was that?
I did a couple. I wrote one about Japan.
Right.
I've never been there, and I wrote one about Hong Kong. And
Right.
the extent of my research was talking to people I knew that had natives and also like American business people that had gone over there. And then of course, lots and lots of, we live in the era of videos. You can literally transcendentally be somewhere and almost vicariously right through drones and through narration, be there, see it.
Right.
I was praised for not so much about the Japanese story, but the story set in Hong Kong. A couple Americans were talking about how great it was and how I must have spent some time there. And I'm like, nope, I just completely did it. Like I tried to imagine it. I tried to use other people's true stories, not the actual stuff from their stories, but just, they talked about karaoke and they talked about how this is popular with the businessmen and the different people. And it worked. It's a lot of work. I become increasingly terrified of doing it because it's just so easy to get it wrong, or you are going to get things wrong. And it's exhausting in some ways.
Right.
But what a great compliment, though, that they thought that you must have spent time there.
Uh-huh.
Oh yeah.
I was just relieved. I was relieved. But
if you can fool them, no. With Radiant Dawn and Ravenous Dust, the highest compliments that I got were from people in the military asking me what branch of the military that I'd served in. It's like, I just listen when you guys talk. But
there you go.
I don't know. Philip, do you have places in your stories also? And what role do they play?
There are places in my stories.
Yeah.
I don't think I write to geography. I don't think. I
don't think you do either, Phil.
All my stories take place. I was thinking about what you guys are talking, and I'm like, I think all my stories take place someplace different. Most of which I've never been. I do the novel. I'm literally just wrapping up now and about to send off. Does take place in Los Angeles, but it's in the 80s. So it's a little bit of a period piece. The novel that's coming out on Halloween is 1905 Pennsylvania. Child Alone with Strangers coming out next summer. That's San Diego, actually, which sounds like I would know a lot about because I live 3 hours north, but I actually don't know anything about San Diego. Very different than Los Angeles. But it is interesting. I mean, but stories like Fragile Dreams, which is in my current collection that which take place in Los Angeles. It is a lot easier to evoke passages that a description and also you can kind of evoke the attitude. I think a lot more. For me, it's more about you have a better understanding of the people that live in those regions when you can immerse yourself into them versus maybe just like the land as a character or the geography as a character. But so I am more comfortable writing about things like things that take place in Los Angeles just because I've been here for so long. But I don't feel like it's something I think about a lot when I'm writing. It's the only time I really thought hard about geography when I was writing was when I wrote my Civil War story, Shiloh, and I was, and I really wanted to know. I wanted to have a good idea of the fauna of where that battle took place specifically, and what the landscape was like, and the hills and the valleys and the trees and all that stuff. So I actually did a lot of research on all that stuff because I wanted to be able to just quickly describe it while I was writing it. But that's the only time I really remember extensively studying.
That's a really good book, and I would like I have links to your books in the show notes here, guys. I'd love it for everyone to read all of your books, but Shiloh's just, I can't imagine the research you put into that.
It's a great book,
yeah,
or a great novella.
Yeah,
I guess it's novella, but if I could follow up, I just what I was going to ask you is that where you write about. I mean, that was my perception. Is that not that you don't ever write about place or can't or whatever, but that your focus does seem to be different. There's a different vibe. Like the vibe I get from your work a lot of times is that you are messing around with modes like you mess around with the McCammon mode or the Matheson mode or the King mode, and you do it, obviously we're all writers are in dialogue with other artists, writers, singers, whatever. But I feel, this is my perception, that it's not so much that geography has informed you, but just that you look at different modes and you do and things that inspired you, and you sort of trifle in that. What I'm curious though is, you're really great at small town. Like some of the stuff that I really like is you're kind of in Matheson or Bradbury or King sort of territory, the way that you like Sabbath, the Commodore, things like that. Or I guess it was Sodager, but the town is what, Sabbath Lake, I believe.
Yeah.
Or Lake Sabbath. So you really do the small town thing really well. Now, where did you grow up? I believe it was Michigan, right? And you never really write about that. Can you tell us about that maybe?
Yeah, I did. I grew up just outside of Detroit in a suburb called Southfield. Yeah, no, it was a bigger central, suburban home. Street hockey, in the street, and snowmen in the winter kind of stuff. But yeah, it's kind of a nondescript area. So I guess it just hasn't really ever felt that interesting to me as far as writing about it. The only time I did is I wrote a novella called Sakulina, which is about the guys who go out on the fishing boat. And that is a direct experience from my days in Michigan. When my brothers and my father and I would go out on a fishing vessel together, and I'd get sick and they'd catch fish. But I don't really write a lot about that area. And again, I don't really think about area when I start a story. I guess to your point, I'm way more focused on, obviously the plot of what I want the story to be, but also I think I'm really focused on the feel of the story. I'm very focused on the tone of the story and the style in which I want to write it. So everything else kind of falls into place, based on those things. And the small town stuff, I don't know. I have gotten that comment back a lot, and I do tend to write a lot of stories that take place in a small town environment. And I don't know really, 'cause I didn't really grow up in a small town. I grew up in a very suburban sprawl area, Michigan, like I said. So I don't know why I'm able to kind of capture that feeling, I guess, of Main Street USA, but it is easy for me and it is comfortable for me. I guess maybe it's just a matter of having a folksy gene somewhere in me, but and kind of catching that flavor. But I do like writing about small town. I especially like, one of the reasons I like writing those Sabbath stories is I very much like writing about small towns with ugly underbellies, that are very pretty and docile on top, and then very, but the roots are deep and corrupted and poisoned and all that stuff. And that's very much what those Sabbath stories are about, is this idyllic, surface with a lot of corruption and scary stuff sort of buried beneath that tends to poke its head up every now and then. They kind of tamp it
Do you
back
think
down.
it might be
So
also influence based, Philip? Like, fan of Stephen King. I don't know if you're a fan of Twin Peaks, Bradbury, that kind of thing. And you're like, I want to do my twist on this too.
Absolutely. I mean, I grew up, obviously, most of us reading Stephen King, so and Ray Bradbury. So that could definitely be a big factor of why that stuff feels comfortable to me. And I tend to, and also I don't like really writing modern, like 2020 stories. And that's probably just because my age. I'm much more comfortable writing about stuff that takes place in the 80s and 90s. And I don't know why. I guess it's just where I feel comfortable. But
no, you're selling out. You want to jump on the 80s wave that's going on right now. That's what it is.
I hear that stuff's going to be really popular again.
It'll be the 90s then, though. Yeah. That'll be screwed.
Yeah.
Well, that's when we really started.
I kid, of course.
That's when the cycle of consuming. I mean, the 80s had a very strong 50s vibe. The 60s, the 90s had a very strong 60s vibe. But going forward from the 90s, we were pretty much just recycling the latter half of the 20th century. So it'll be interesting to see when that just breaks. and we all become
That's a
Eloy
really
and
good.
Morlocks. But
That's a really good way to put it, because that's kind of what it does feel like to me. It just doesn't feel like the aughts and the current decade. I don't feel like there's a lot of character to the 2000s. I think that's a big part of it. The only character that we have is that we're so tech savvy now, and we have phones that can launch rocket ships and stuff. But that's not interesting to me. Technology doesn't really interest me. So I think that's part of the reason why maybe I like to settle into that sweet spot of just pre-internet, just pre-cell phones, because I just feel like it's got so much more character, I guess, that time period. Whereas now we're all just, screens with names.
Well, and it's easier to characterize too. I mean, I'm writing I'm working on an 80s story right now that draws a lot on my own experiences, my own memories, and of being part of a counterculture in a medium-sized city where, as far as the counterculture, it is a small town. Everybody knows everybody. They all see each other at one of the 2 or 3 nightclubs that are open in town. And there is a very strong sense that everybody but you is into the same thing. Everybody's watching the same TV show that night if they're home, or they're at the same sporting event, or the same one of 2 or 3 movies if they're out. And since the 2000s, all of those cultures and vibes and communities are still there, but it's so much more fragmented. You can extract whatever you want or put whatever you want into it. But yeah, it does feel so much like culture was much more, for better or for worse, was a lot more homogenized and kind of monolithic. And the feeling of it was, I mean, that and no cell phones, which is just really just makes everything a lot fucking easier.
And also, it also felt like it was so much more. There was so much more organic growth going on culturally in those those decades. And I don't feel like there's a lot of, and I guess and maybe it's just me and I'm being a grumpy old man, but I guess I just feel like there really hasn't been that much progress culturally in the last 20 years. Like I said, outside of technology, we really haven't advanced very much. We're superhero movies and cell phones. And, that doesn't really fascinate me. I'd much rather talk about what is going on in, the late 1800s or the early 1900s or the 1950s, the 1980s, one decade I don't have a lot of familiarity with and probably would never feel comfortable writing about, never say never, but is the 60s. And I know 60s and 70s are such a huge wealth of culture to pull from, and attitudes and personalities. But for whatever reason, it's never really interested me. And probably because I was born after the fact, but and I'm more familiar with the 80s and 90s, obviously. But yeah, I don't know. But it's weird because I'm reading Once Upon a Time in Hollywood right now, which is the Tarantino book and movie, and it's such a fascinating era. But yeah, for whatever reason, it never really caught fire with my imagination that time, despite all the fireworks politically and socially and everything else of the late 60s. I don't know, for whatever reason, I've read a lot about it and I've studied a lot about it, but I don't know, for me, I've never minded for personalities, characters, or stories. I don't know why, I just never caught fire with me.
For some reason, and I've talked about this with Laird briefly before, but the 70s stories appeal to me. I don't know why that is, but they do. So
yeah, I like them too.
What would you say?
Oh, go ahead.
Throw out some names. What are some good 70s novels, or there are authors who focus on that era that you think would be worth mentioning?
Oh,
not to put you on the spot, Mike.
Oh, Mike, sorry.
Or either one.
You are, because of my memory, but I'll just start off with what and that's the Matthew Scudder books that took place in the 70s, especially when the Sacred Genmo closes, and the beginning of the series, The Sins of the Fathers, things like that. These aren't horror novels; these are crime novels, but they're very,
I was
very
about to
noir.
say, it sounds a lot of noir crime from that era.
Yeah,
Pierce Schraub though was huge for me in the 70s.
Schraub, thank you. Yeah, that would. Be
I didn't start reading him. I didn't start reading him until probably around 80, 81, really. But some of his first novels that I read were like Julia and Shadowland and Floating Dragon, which are all latter 70s, edging up into 80. And of course, Stephen King, had some great stuff in the 70s. But I'm kind of like Mike. A lot of the stuff I read from the 70s were a lot of those thrillers and crime novels that were sort of big.
Travis McGee too.
Yeah, Travis McGee. I mean, stuff that comes from the 60s too, but was, it kind of survived into the 70s. But for horror, I have to say that Stephen King and Peter Straub were the two titans for me back, their books from that era are what. And I would say Coyne, but Coyne is just like right around the early 80s. I think he writes with the 70s aesthetic though, because that's the thing to remember is that even though stuff that appears in the early 80s, okay, great, that's when it appears. You're not running off the fumes. You're still running off the fumes. Those guys are most likely running off the fumes from the 70s or even the 60s. But this is all fascinating. Yeah. I think it's important to talk about or just even consider why we do what we, because we always get that question. Well, where do you get your ideas? But it really isn't that bad a question. It's just that it's such a basic. It's just a beginning point. I really am fascinated with geography and the time period you grew up and where you grew up, the culture that you grew up in. That I don't know. I think it's interesting to have the key or a key to what informs, right? Your favorite writers. Why? Even if they don't consciously have a plan or a plot, you start talking to a writer and going, well, I noticed you put this in your work. Do you think it has anything to do with this, that, or the other? And most of the time, if they haven't consciously thought of it, they'll go, I never thought of it that way. Yeah. And then go off and there's a bunch of other stuff to excavate. But I think that enriches the writing. That's just one stage of enjoying good literature. Constantly I hear people say, I never reread the same thing. I never rewatch anything. I'm going, au contraire, I'll read the same story 100 times. Well, not 100 times, but countless times. And if they're good, I will get something new. Not every time, but maybe every third, fourth, fifth time. And be enriched thereby. So.
I interviewed someone one time and I'm not judging, but he said, I never reread a book because there's too many other books out there to read. But there are books that I come back to that I just feel like I'm going on this adventure again, or I'm in this place again. And I love it. And at its most basic level, isn't reading supposed to be enjoyable or at least make us really feel something, So yeah.
It's a weird comparison maybe, but I think there's something there. Bruce Lee, to paraphrase Bruce Lee, he once said, don't fear the man who has practiced 10,000 techniques, fear the man who has practiced one technique 10,000 times. Yeah. And not to say that it's not one for one comparable, but there's something, there's a kernel of truth in there that something worth reading, not something you read, something that was worth reading, right, is worth revisiting. And
Robert Frost is one of my favorite poems. You can bet your ass I've read some of his poems well over 100 times.
And I would think we would quite profit from him if he was sitting here right now and sort of musing about why he wrote what he wrote, or not even why he did it, but like, well, this is what happened to me around that time. I think we would get something out of that.
Yeah. Speaking of just real quick age, related stories. I got an art Whisper Down the Lane by so I'm sorry. He's gonna kill me. Yeah, Clay McLeod Chapman. And Satanic Panic. I mean, there's some material to mine there, man. The 80s.
I think we all grew up in the Satanic Panic, didn't we?
Yeah, pretty much.
Big. Yeah. It was big in Alaska.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
California, right? So.
Well, yeah. I mean, in San Diego, we were watching it on the news. There wasn't really a local component to it. We were more all about the UFO cults.
Mm-hmm. California.
We had Unarius, which was notorious on. They were on Real People and a lot of those like just odd documentary shows. And then when the Heaven's Gate thing happened in the late 90s, they revisited the Unarius Academy, and Unarius is still there. They've still got like a storefront church with this huge tabletop model of the the Intergalactic Federation University that was going to form itself out of a skyscraper made of stacked flying saucers on this land that they had bought and cleared for that purpose. And that prophecy's come and gone, but there's still these aging people that tend its memory. Yeah, the satanic panic and the kind of hysteria that's always, I mean, I think it was Foucault who said that every era has its own characteristic mental illness. Yeah, the thing that in Americans it expresses itself as, yeah, that thing that we don't have any reason to be afraid of, that we're afraid of instead of,
the stuff we should be afraid
things.
of.
Right. And it yeah, the satanic panic had this weird tinge of, yes, reaffirming that evil is out there in the world and it has a new face, but also just that fear that other people are having more fun than you is what felt like
that's what drugs are for.
Yeah, it was a mix.
I don't have that.
Salem witch trials redo, right? I mean, it's all basically it was. We just go after the kids who are having too much fun.
Cody, what time do you have to go? How many minutes? How much?
I'm good till 1:30.
Which would be okay. So that's another 40 minutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
But Laird, you have some more questions for these guys?
No, I do, but I think we should probably talk a little bit about their books. Even though we have a bit of time, let's talk about their books. So why don't you I'll ask Phil about his book. We'll start with that because I'm pretty familiar with this book. Phil, how does Beneath the Pale Sky, when you put it together, I actually am really fascinated with how other people put their collections together. I'm also really fascinated with how musicians put albums together. Somebody was asking me the other day, they said, what's your philosophy on this stuff? And I said, actually, less looking at what other people do, although that's really fascinating with their books, but looking at what other artists do. So I guess it's a kind of a two-part question. I actually have gleaned a lot of fascinating insights into listening to musicians go, well, we went up to the Catskills and we had an orgy and then we got drunk and did some shrooms for a few weeks. And that's why it took so long to make, the White Album or whatever.
Right.
But seriously, how musicians put their albums together is a pretty fascinating concept when you hear about, and it doesn't matter what genre, country music, rock, jazz, whatever it is, right? I don't even have to be interested in the genre. I'm like, wow, when they talk about what they left on the cutting room floor, I couldn't include this because it wasn't thematically, it didn't sync up. What did you do with your first collection that you feel maybe you changed or reinforced with this latest collection? If you could basically talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. And it's something, we talk about a lot, you and I, and it is fascinating. And, Behold the Void was much different because that was my first collection and I didn't have that much published content. So I was kind of, that's almost, I don't know what the ratio is, but a good chunk of that book is original, including stories like Failsafe that were later reprinted, multiple times, but I could never get them originally published. And I think when I approached the second one, Beneath the Pale Sky, and this I think is generally sort of my philosophy. I guess I don't know if I have a philosophy. I've only had the two books, but at least approaching this one was, I did want to have it thematically consistent, and I did, but not necessarily thematic to subject as much as thematic to tone. And I wanted it to be imbued with a lot. This was going to be like a very dread-soaked book, and the stories that I chose for it were stories that I thought kept that sort of consistent tone of dread and with maybe like subject themes of the afterlife and of life, what happens after death and stuff like that. So there are a few stories that touch on that theme, but yeah, and when I put them together, I made one thing I would, if I could redo it, I would, if I could go back and kind of redo it, I wouldn't change it now, but is I kind of a little I think it was a mistake to put, I have an original novella at the end of Behold the Void. And people, a lot of people respond very positively to that novella, Mandela. And I kind of wish going back, I had put that story either in the front of the book or in the first couple stories, because what I realized now is that a lot of people, you know, collections are, you know, something that people kind of like peck at versus like a novel, which you kind of go from cover to cover. And I was kind of wish like I have had that regret a little bit, because I wish more people had read the last story in my book, and where I was thinking it sort of like as a big finale, I think it kind of became a sort of like, you know, something that some people got to, and the percentages go down as you get further, I think, along in the book. So
the final boss,
except for the people who skip around.
Right. Yeah, some people skip around, right? So so anyway, but in Pale Sky, I had two original, you know, novelette, you know, short novellas, if you want, and I packed them both up front. And then, you know, some reviewers have not liked that, but a lot of the readers have. And then I try and keep it just like I said, you know, as far as like story order is concerned, I'm very aware of how long each story is. I'm very aware of how heavy or what kind of mood the story will give you, so that I'm not duplicating that. I don't want you to read, you know, necessarily, you know, a really heavy, intense, you know, violent story that's going to like leave you a little bit exhausted, and then follow it up with like another one, and follow up with like another one. So like, for example, the book ends with Fragile Dreams, which is a very intensive, very visceral, very physical, you know, and it's long story. It's kind of an intense experience. And then whereas the last story is very almost whimsical and short, because I wanted to kind of have it as a sort of a palate cleanser to what you just went through. And I think people enjoy that. They like the idea of like, you know, kind of going with the flow of a collection. So, and you know, again, I think like for my next collection, I'm already piecing it together. I want to go with like a much more pulpy theme. I want it to be much more like high energy, fun, violent, bloody, with sort of a, you know, pulpy sensibility. And so that's kind of the kind of stories I'm targeting for that next collection. So I do think about it, but I think about it more as tone versus subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
what about
that's
from
how
a sales
I
variation on that question would be the sales point of view. I'm very aware of how important the first story in a collection or an anthology is, because, you know, in this day and age, so many people read on Kindle, for example, so they get that Kindle sample, and that's reading that sample is what influences them to click the buy button or not click the buy button. You know, do you think about that at all, or does it matter?
Yeah, I do. I think this first story has to be strong. But the other, you know, the other side of it is, and these guys know this is better than I do, is everybody has a favorite story, and every reader has their own favorite story, and every reader has their own story they you know, disliked the most, and none of them and no two are the same. So you can't really. What I try and do with the first story is just pick the story that I feel would be a nice. It's not even the strongest story in my mind necessarily, but more like just what I think would be a nice way to open your journey. Honestly, I guess I don't think about it so much. I like, you know, the story that opens Behold the Void is arguably not, you know, not the strongest story in the book, for at least so I'm told from reviewers, but readers. But a lot of people really like it, and I just liked it because my thinking on it was I wanted to start with sort of a fun Twilight Zone kind of story before I got into some more deeper, more intense stuff. So that was my thinking, was I just wanted to open with like a fun, you know, a fun half hour of you know, craziness. And that was really the only thought process I had to it. And with this one, I opened with Harvest, which you're very familiar with, obviously, Mike. And I think I just wanted to open with Harvest because I liked the way that story opened. I thought the story opened kind of like a book would open. It is a very long story, but that was my only thinking, was it kind of was a nice way to kind of slip into the book. And that's really all the thought that that I gave to it. And I think like with the next one, I'll probably start with like something shocking just to give people the flavor of what the book's going to be like.
Well, I definitely want to follow. I want to ask Cody a couple things, but I want to remind me when we swing back to you, I want to ask you a question. You just said something about Behold the Void and how a lot of the stories were reprinted, but you couldn't initially sell them. Please remind me of that, because I want to ask. I actually have something I want to talk to you about. But Cody, kind of a similar thing. You've written novels. You have acclaimed short stories. You've been reprinted, like, in the year's best, things like that, up for awards. Tell us a little bit about your latest book that's out right now, or your latest. I'm sorry, your latest. I haven't read it yet. Is it a novella or a novel? But could you just give us more about it?
Flying
and
Nun.
then
None.
What's that?
Sure.
Yeah, and maybe a little after you get done telling us a little bit about it.
Right.
You had a journey getting there.
Yeah.
And have you? How is it reflective of your journey? I guess with and maybe short fiction versus long fiction, that kind of a thing. However you want to go.
All right. Well, first let me tack on the back end of the question you asked Phil, because that is a fascinating subject to me as well, and I do see a lot of correlation between how you'd structure a collection and an album.
Absolutely, answer that then. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, real quick, I was just wanted to observe that, like, my man Michael Kazepis over at Kingshot Press, when he put together Strategies Against Nature, it was an unthemed collection. I've got 3 unthemed and 2 themed. And he approached it very consciously, like using the track order for Master of Puppets as his template. For having like a very strong, loud, forceful, mission statement kind of track at as an opener, and then one that's a little bit more expansive, and then knowing the stories as well as I did, looking at the table of contents that he arranged, I could totally see this terrain. There was a map to it, and it's like designing a roller coaster ride. And so yeah, there's a lot of fun to be had with that, and yeah, the same stories in the wrong order can create a very, very different effect. I always smack my forehead when people say, yeah, I just dip into it and just read at random, or I just read whatever story.
Well, before you go on, I want to ask you about that. This might be of interest to people. So you have these collections. Are you normally the master of your own, like you decide, or do you normally collaborate with the editor publisher about order?
Okay. I've done the order on most of them. I mean, when All Monster Action first came out, Jeremy Robert Johnson at Swallowdown and I had a dialogue about how to arrange things. And basically the thinking was, because there's 3 interconnected novellas and then kind of a garage sale of odd, sort of similar in their attitude. They're very pulpy and trashy and seem to be inspired more by bootleg crappy movies and comic books than literature. So we arranged those kind of as coming attractions, and the trilogy of novellas as the feature, and or cartoon short subjects in a newsreel. And so that kind of dictated it. But with I love when an editor is willing to get under the hood with me. When my last collection, The Man Who Escaped This Story and Other Stories, Alessandro over at Independent Legions was very hands off. He took the collection as I submitted it, went through it and made some technical suggestions, but didn't really. It wasn't so much that he was neglecting it. I think it's just that he trusted me, which is nice. But I like having that back and forth and having somebody looking over my shoulder on those, addressing those questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
That's a great title, by the way. The Man Who Escaped This Story and Other Stories.
Oh yeah, it's riffing on a Gene Wolfe one, The Island of Dr. Death and Other Stories and Stories.
And the Death of Dr. Island. And
yes.
And speaking of skipping
yes,
around,
and the Doctor of Death Island. Yes.
Right.
Speaking of skipping around, if I heard it once from Joe Pulver, I heard it 100 times. How much that pissed him off. You're like, I spend 2 weeks getting the order just right. It's an art, Mike. It's an art. I'm like, yeah, right. You take all the stories, you write the titles, you put them in a hat, you shake them up, and that's the order. You know, you're not fooling me.
Well, I remember
fate,
Ellen Datlow said. I remember Ellen Datlow talking about her anthologies and saying that there's definitely, you know, she said there's definitely an order. You know, it's not random. You know, she orders her anthos with all, you know, different writer stories, and there's definitely it's interesting. You know, there definitely is a sort of like an ebb and flow, a haunted house that you're building. You know, in a way that you want there to be a certain flow and a certain vibe and a certain journey, if you will. And it's and I might have missed it because I had to step away for a minute, but I don't know if Cody talked about.
Also, we were talking about you. Yeah.
The whole time.
Books that you've edited as as an editor where you weren't necessarily, wasn't your content. Is that different? Is that experience different than when you're doing your own stories? Or, is it kind of the same deal?
It is similar. I mean, you're arranging those projects, and maybe you're able to be a little bit more objective because you're coming in the same way that the reader is going to, and so you don't have all of this freight, all this emotional baggage attached to the stories. And that's why it's great to have an editor at least to check with you. Because you could be taking people on the journey that you think you're taking them on, and it'll feel very, very different. When you're arranging stories in an anthology, or for a periodical, that can be a little bit more. It's I don't know whether it's easier or whether it's just facile, whether it feels easier because you're not married to those stories. But it's fun. It's like decorating a room or making a mixtape.
This is interesting. Andreas on the live chat says Robert Sherman's "We All Hear Stories in the Dark" plays with the idea that stories change their meaning dependent on the order in which you read them.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Context is totally important. Important. So anyway, I can just barrel on into Flying Nun.
Why'd you write the Flying Nun?
That was
I'm glad you did. I loved it, but
thanks. I wrote it. I started writing it in like the high noon of the pandemic, and really briefly the cover art came first. Matthew Revere, who's like the chip kid of weird fiction cover design, had done this Photoshop collage. He put it up on Instagram, and he just is kind of a offhand contest was like, I can't think of a name. Can anybody think of a name for this? And I just chucked out, the Flying Nun, yuck. And he liked that one. And a couple hours later, Max Booth, the third, reached out to me and said, hey, I just bought the rights to that work. You want to write a story for it? So I said, sure. And so the art and the spirit of the contest, or the spirit of gameplay, kind of informed it in a lot of ways. And so it isn't, it's very light and funny, or seemingly light and very funny, without being really satire compared to everything else that I've written, except maybe Sleazeland. But also
illustrated by Betty Rocksteady.
Did these amazing little chick tracktastic cartoons for it that really capture that it's nice and sweet but not really kind of a vibe that perfectly complement what the cover art and the text. But I wanted to do a couple of things differently from what I've always done before. I try to pack a novel's worth of idea and emotion into a short story. And then conversely, I try to pack a year or two's worth of headspace into a novel. I wanted to kind of reverse that trend and do something. I'm a slow reader. I don't get to revisit. I would love to reread a lot more things. I just don't have time. And I already own more books than I will ever read, and it's become like a hoarding psychology thing. It's my death avoidance. I can't die until I've read all this shit. So I wanted to write something that anybody, even myself, could actually finish in a single sitting. When I read a blurb on a book, it says, I finished this in a single sitting and I've been reading it for 2 weeks. I feel like a complete jackass. So I wanted to write something write it really fast. Just open the lid off of my id and not really consciously structure it. Just get out of my own way and let the story tell itself, just come out of me. It started out really easy and then unexpectedly became really hard as my life circumstances changed very radically, and I was reassessing things. And that story went from a fun game that I was playing to being kind of a lifeline. It was I was unable to finish any of the other writing projects that I had, and somehow that one came to the fore for me. And I came to recognize that it wasn't just like a fun, frothy fantasy, that it is kind of cosmic horror by other means. For a lot of people, cosmic horror is a luxury they can't afford because their regular existence is already bitterly meaningless and inimical, and just circumstances are arbitrarily crushing them. And so when they come to fiction, they don't have anomie or malaise. They're straight up already afraid of life. But there's such a gulf between wish fulfillment fantasy on the one hand and really dark confrontational horror on the other. And I wanted to kind of swirl those up a little bit and do an empowerment story that does go awry, that does really address what people who feel powerless in life would do if given real power in a seemingly untenanted, meaningless universe. And
because this protagonist, she's pissed off
yeah
at the way that the world is structured. Let's see, there's a quote. I hope I highlighted this one. Oh, here it is. She told herself she'd somehow blown it by becoming too aware of how everything worked. And now she could never share in the simple joys of prom, professional sports, or a Chick-fil-A franchise coming to town.
Yes. Yeah.
So she wished she were an idiot, because at least idiots were generally happy. The worse the world got, the happier they seemed to be.
In other words, she'd gone to the taping of her favorite genre type show and could not watch that show anymore without thinking about it.
Right. Or trying to work in comics, and then you can't enjoy comics anymore.
Right.
Or losing that magic. That once you're in the knowledge, you realize that living outside the mystery was the place to be. That you were much happier.
Well, this book is by turns funny and by turns horrific and very offensive if you're deeply religious.
Well, I would hope. Yeah.
I mean, that is a compliment.
Well, thanks.
I used to be deeply religious when I was a kid. Laird, you were too. As you've said many times. And
fundamentalist, evangelical, borderline Pentecostal.
I mean, to the max.
Yeah.
And I won't dwell on that here, but some of the quotes in here, I thought some people are, I don't know if anybody who needs to read this book is going to read it, so, but I hope that they do. But here's another quote, and I don't want to quote the whole book. Yeah, both of them. So correct me if I'm wrong, she said. I think she's talking to the Pope of all people. Only Cody Goodfellow would do this to the Pope in fiction. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's another compliment. But women can't be trusted because an old book says that one of us tempted a man to eat a fruit that made him stop being a dumb animal. But you cross-dressing buzzkills are in charge because God forced himself on a married virgin and knocked her up just to redeem us for being exactly as shitty as he made us. That just kind of blows my mind, honestly.
And I forget whether she's talking to the Pope or the Shadow Pope, because
one of them. Yeah,
both their temperatures. But it's so.
You gotta read this, Laird.
I intend to. Yeah, absolutely. We lost you, Cody.
We lost your audio. What did you do?
He's moving around too much. He pulled the jack out.
Probably.
He's always broken inside. Robot Cody broke.
God has struck back. Said, oh,
Am
yeah.
I there?
Yeah.
Doc,
You're
you're
back.
back.
You're back.
Okay,
God,
okay,
God,
yeah.
God failed. All right.
You gotta
go ahead.
turn that thing
Stupid
every so
handy
often,
button
Cody,
on
or-
my $9 headset that yeah, you can't make it do anything on
I
purpose.
thought you were a writer. Don't
gotta
you like
keep-
make
you gotta
millions
keep
per year or
winding-
something?
You gotta keep winding Cody up, or he stops.
Quit bragging about your glamorous writer life, Cody.
Ooh, I'm from the future, right?
So
So
it lights up.
yeah. It's yeah. I don't have a bone to pick with religion. I'm not a recovering Catholic or anything, and I was raised with my mom was a very strong spiritual seeker, but was never really indoctrinated me. I only had just enough glancing experience with religion to find it fascinating, and I realize it's really easy to skewer or attack religion, and really easy to be misunderstood. I remember seeing seeing the Sinead O'Connor's performance on Saturday Night Live when she tore apart that picture of the Pope, and Joe Pesci was the host that night. Said he wanted to smack her. Like, oh well, that's what God wants you to do.
Yeah.
But it was years and years before anybody bothered to delve deeper into the fact that, well, Sinead's just got a problem with the Pope. That she was protesting the campaign of covering up sexual abuse in Ireland, which had been endemic and hideous there for a long time before it came here. And so I realized that even folks who are within a religious tradition that are open-minded can have a problem with it. And I did try to focus more on not the nature of attacking the whole Bible itself, but if you believe in God, if you truly believe in God and believe that God tries to enact their will on the world and is working towards our highest good, then you should be angrier than any atheist at a lot of the assholes that are out there huckstering in their name, especially homegrown American religions, because there is kind of an unspoken code that no religious leaders will ever attack each other. And so when like in the 80s, that was the other side of the satanic panic, is Jimmy Swaggart and Jimmy and Tammy Faye Baker falling apart, and all of these grotesque sex scandals and financial scandals and stuff. My favorite's Robert Tilton.
Oh my God,
the most shameless monster. And there's one of the earliest and most hilarious like YouTube meme videos is that thing, the compilation of him having those phony religious conniption fits.
Let the bodies hit the floor.
With
the theme song.
Yeah. Or the one that just has the farts, where he's just stroking the farts out of himself. Oh yes, Lord. Oh yes, Lord.
Oh my God.
And this was a guy that was they literally like 2020 or some investigative group found that he had a machine to just extract the cash and the checks out of people's prayer donations.
That's
and
right.
then they showed
But all these guys had a common enemy in the 80s, backward masking, unmasked, and all that stuff. So
that was why it was necessary to create this supernatural evil to offset the very banal evil that was claiming the throne of good.
Your Sinead O'Connor, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I gotta say this. Your Sinead O'Connor story, or the reminder. I was at a con, HP Lovecraft Film Festival or Necronomicon, I can't remember.
Right.
And we were at a hotel, and I was walking over with Lehman, and Lehman dubbed it the Rapey Hotel or something. Some of the guys were staying at that. So I'm over there, we're just going to hang out with the guys, and I won't mention his name, but one of the nicest guys in our genre that you guys all know, comes out of his room, picks up the Bible that was by his bed, and throws it down the hall with enough force to hit the back wall. And I was like,
wow.
Whoa. And I'm kind of applauding, but he was the last person I would have expected. But he was so offended that there was a Bible next to him. So
yeah. Yeah, and it used to be seen as a comfort as fundamental as any of the amenities in the restroom. But yeah, the one particular group is offering you one particular interpretation of the Bible for you to reach out to in hard times. And if somebody finds consolation in that. If somebody feels genuinely like anything in it puts them in touch with a higher reality that lets them carry on, then that's something magical. And I wasn't trying to trash the legitimacy of that, but I was trying to capture that sense that I would feel any well, the main character in this story is a young woman growing up in Marin County, and her mother is a famous author who writes those kind of your guardian angels books. And so they're kind of that comfort food religion that sands off all of the thou shalts and the where you're going, and just gives you these imaginary spirit friends that will protect you, and they're just a step above My Little Ponies in their spiritual authenticity. And so she recognizes that she is wired in some way to seek out a higher reality. She's a spiritual seeker, whether she wants to be or not, and yet everything that she's seen is very dispiriting. So she commits to joining a nunnery in Marin County, and it turns out to not be the kind of rigorous affair that she wants it to be. It's just a kind of a pissy pajama party.
With many cats. I love you, Cody.
Yeah, no, the cats are the reason for it. If it wasn't endowed as a cat shelter, they'd all be out on the street.
Right.
But and so it's in seeking to get past the received wisdom from somebody else, from some other flawed human being. She reaches out into the universe and essentially asks a question. And what I was trying to get to, if you can get past the slagging the corruption of the Catholic Church, or the rank bestial solipsism of most of the evangelical leaders, I tried to provide a real, as close as I could as an agnostic, a real sense of what how religion can be a wonderful and good thing, even if God doesn't show up. And I recognize, God not showing up is hardly proof positive that God doesn't exist. But maybe maybe the whole universe is God striving towards self-awareness, and we have some vital role to play in that. And it was trying to use a lot of cosmic horror themes by other or achieve a lot of cosmic horror themes by other means. Trying to see if I couldn't do cosmic horror that could be funny without losing any of its bite.
To me, you went from a whimsical kind of funny beginning to this hardcore, look at all the stuff that's wrong with religion if you think about it too hard. And then at the end of the book, you provide this answer, possible answer that's very, very comforting. And the that again, I highlighted it. All we've got is each other. That's all that there is. And okay, so maybe that does sound hokey, but it's true. And
right?
Talk about love and love for each other, and that's what we have. And you end up with a quote from Spinoza. My beloved, this life is not a test, not a step on the way, not a rehearsal, nor a prelude to paradise. This life is the only thing here and now, and is all you need. I have set you absolutely free. No prizes or punishments, no sins or virtues. No one carries a marker, no one keeps a record. You are absolutely free to create in your life heaven or hell. You remind me at the end of The Contact, the alien tells Jodie Foster, in all of our searching, all we have found is the comfort that we have in each other. I'm paraphrasing.
Right. And it was surprising how hard that theme was for me to come by and put that down. And I probably couldn't have if I wouldn't have gone through so much shit, because I've led a pretty comfortable comfortable life. I've had to struggle here and there, but there have always been people who helped me out and provided me with support so that I could do the stuff that I do instead of get a legitimate day job. And but I was raised, I mean, we were talking about the eras that we come up in. I grew up, I was born in 1970, and I consumed and was consumed by the entertainment and the news then, and that overwhelming sense of malaise and cynicism, and the movies that we were watching were all telling us that the system is falling apart, the people that are in charge are insane and corrupt idiots, and that nothing is sacrosanct. And seeing the millennials react to that with just this palpable disgust and this longing for, sincerity, positivity, optimism. Where's the hope? Having to grow up in the mess that we collectively made and left for them, and trying to find that bright spot. It kind of shamed me when the kind of the walls fell down, and I really did have to struggle just to get up and just to continue to create. I did revisit these ideas that had only really ever touched my heart, in the depths of a mushroom trip or something, where it's like, yeah, the universe is alive. We are all one consciousness, and we should all love each other, and that those things stopped feeling quite so silly, and I started finding myself wanting to express those in a forceful way, not in a way that's divorced of kind of the woo-woo positivity that makes it so easy to dismiss the value of those messages.
Yeah.
Nice.
And the last thing I'll say is on this, besides the fact that, please, folks, read this book called The Flying Nun, None, by the one and only Cody Goodfellow. Something that I have thought many times, and this is the first time I've seen it in print. If it's elsewhere, I missed it. And it's about leadership, especially political leadership, running countries and so forth. And she says to someone, the real reason that you shouldn't have this power, this kind of power, is because you want it.
Yeah.
And I've often thought that, what if you picked the president of the United States from people who were really, really qualified with high IQs, and they aren't really particularly interested in the job, but
yes.
you're like, you're it for the next 4 years, dude, and it's your patriotic duty to be the president, not because you want to, but because you're qualified to.
Right. And that is, Greeks, Athenian democracy got a lot of things wrong. I mean, well, they had slaves, but
that is wrong. I'm going to go on. I'm going to say that.
And right I don't care who gets defended.
Yes.
Yeah. Take that, slave owners. But that one of the coolest aspects of Athenian democracy was that those offices were not offices that people aspired to. It was jury duty, essentially.
Right.
And that is something that we ought to do.
Right.
When the George Floyd thing happened last year, I floated this idea that I wish I would have protected more zealously. I just threw it out there on Facebook that whoever's doing a police academy reboot should do it as a scenario where the police have been disbanded. Every last one of them was fired, and the city has a mandate to create a new police force. And they select them just like jury duty. And so they go out and grab you and make you become a cop. And so, of course, the police force becomes much more like the citizenry that it's supposed to protect.
Except for with jury duty, I would add the caveat that people who are qualified to do whatever particular job it is, whether it's president of the United States or be a police officer, not because they've got a bully complex, but because they actually do want to, dare I say it, protect and serve.
Yes. Yes. And so you have a lot of community leaders but also people that were part of those vulnerable groups. But they also take away their guns. So they have to become a new kind of police force. I thought it would be if you were going to make like a really, really cheese ass kind of throwback to 80s wacky 80s comedies, but that ends up becoming something that's this actually is a model for how this could and would and probably should work.
I have one question for Sorry.
I was just going to say, one live viewer says, what a beautifully deep and relevant discussion of metaphysics and the human experience. So this is a really great discussion, guys.
I know we're running out of time with you. I just want to ask one question, just out of curiosity. Listen, because like I said, I haven't read this yet, but more that he quotes it, the more you talk about it, I'm like, yeah, it's a must read. Are you? I'm sure you're familiar, but have you read much C.S. Lewis? Because there's just certain elements of how you're describing it, not plot wise, but just your philosophy reminds me of like the Screw Tapes or the Out of the Silent Planet or This Hideous Strength. Are you familiar with those at all?
I'm familiar with them, but I haven't actually read them. I read one of his essays.
Okay.
In my freshman year of college, they had us read the grad student had us read this C.S. Lewis essay that at the time I was insanely frustrated with, because to me he was trying to argue why there's no point in arguing about whether or not you're a Christian. Of course you're a Christian. If you live, then you're a Christian. And he's like, a fish cannot discuss water because a fish is immersed in water. And I'm like, I'm glad you're feeling that, but if I'm not feeling that, how is this supposed to convince me to feel
anything besides the Chronicles of Narnia that I've ever read of C.S. Lewis? I just want to throw it across the room. I'm done.
It just the argumentation of your narrator strikes me as kind of the epistle style, or I shouldn't say that, the adversarial style. From his from his day. And I just wondered if that was any influence, but it sounds like it wasn't.
Bertrand Russell.
Okay.
They had us read the C.S. Lewis essay and this Bertrand Russell essay, Why I'm Not a Christian. And Russell's essay was fiery. It was like XTC's Dear God. He just went through it and he just went, no, look at what a shit show. I mean, even assuming that this gospel actually happened, this guy was kind of an asshole. He takes the demons out of these people, and then he puts them into pigs and makes the pigs jump off a cliff. A lot of he got into the nuts and bolts of how the historical Jim Crackery involved in the gospel, but also just in how that even if we take it at its face value, this thing out there is a monster and it doesn't deserve our faith or our love. And so I did try to kind of take you through the Bertrand Russell country and end up in kind of a C.S. Lewis country, because I would love to be there. I would love to be that fish in that water that knows that with every breath that there's a benign agency and a purpose behind it all.
Carl Sagan said something like that.
Yeah,
that he said, I would love to believe that after I die, I'm going to be reunited with my loved ones and so on and so forth. Yeah. But I can't believe it because as much as I've looked at it, there's no evidence for it.
And Modest Mouse said, if you wasted life, why wouldn't you waste death?
Right. Yeah. I wrote a short story after my dog died 2 years ago.
I'm sorry, Cody. I know how hard that is.
I had cats all my life. And this dog kind of chose me, and he was my best friend for 10 years. And after he passed, I was looking for a way to pay tribute to him. And I wrote this short story where this guy passes away and he finds himself standing in front of a door, kind of like in Kafka's Before the Law. And what's standing between him and that door is his dog that had died several years before. And the dog stands up on its hind legs and tells him, this is how it works. Your judge in the afterlife is the animal that knew you best. And love it. And the guy's like, well, gosh, what's the afterlife like out there? And he's like, the dog tells me, remember those walks we used to go on, those wonderful walks? It's like that. And it just goes on forever and ever. And the guy thinks about his first thought when he sees the dog is how this looks exactly like how his dog always was whenever he came home or whenever he was away at work or something. His dog was always sitting right there at the door with no sense of time. He'd be gone for 5 minutes and the dog would react as if he'd been gone for a year. And sometimes he'd be gone for a year and the dog would just kind of look at him as if he was just gone for an hour. And so whenever he'd leave, he looked the dog in the eyes and he'd say, I'll be right back in a minute. Even if he was going on an extended business trip, to try to minimize the dog's pain. Maybe he could fool the dog into thinking he'd only be gone for a minute. And so, his dog tells him about how wonderful the afterlife is if you get to go to the right one. And the dog stands up and opens the door and steps through it. And the guy's like, when do we get to go? And the dog looks him in the eyes and says, in a minute, and closes the door. And so the guy sits down in front of the door to wait. He's like, my dog will be back any minute.
I know you got to go. Last thing I want to say about the Flying Nun is
actually, I don't have to go in a hurry. I
you don't?
Yeah.
I enjoyed the. I caught the Book of Daniel reference. Thank you for that. That was great.
Oh, cool.
Mene tickle you first.
So
right.
That's beautiful stuff, man. But I think I need to swing back over to Phil. And,
please.
But that's just gorgeous stuff. Thank you so much.
Oh,
I'm really looking forward to I'm in the middle of the deadline. So I'm really looking forward to getting back to writing. This is a great conversation with you guys.
Right.
So Phil, I do actually.
By the way, nothing I discuss is going to be anywhere near deep or heartfelt as what Cody just discussed for the last half an hour.
Well, it's contrast.
It's basically going to be like horrible people dying.
Tell us the worst thing that ever happened to you, Philip.
Front load the dead pets.
Well, it's like the collection, right? We were just talking about. You put the heavy, deep stuff, and then we go back to like, all right, here's something fluffy.
Yeah.
No, but seriously.
And I have cats, so they don't give a shit about me. If I go to the afterlife, my cat's there. Believe me, he's not waiting.
He goes, I've learned how to use a can opener. It's fine.
Yeah, the door is closed. The cats are gone. They'll be back when they're hungry.
No, I'm trying to articulate this briefly, but sort of succinctly. I have been taking kind of a little bit of I don't want to say a dive. I've been kind of dipping into a few collections by writers who have emerged over the last decade or so, like Kurt Favre. And I hope I say that correctly, how to pronounce his last name, but like that's an example. Or Gordon B. White, who had his debut come out recently. And so, and also some authors that I've just maybe have neglected because I just have there's just so much to read. But this relates to you in the sense that you talk about your first collection, that a lot of your stories they were originals, and you had tried, and I was involved, in discussing, kind of being there as you were going through the process of submitting. Then we talked quite a bit. And I guess what I'm getting at is, so I've been reading these, a lot of these authors, and some of them, they don't have as many reviews on Amazon, or we haven't outside of just like, Mike Davis, for example, who's a really big promoter of a lot of, just across the spectrum of weird and horror fiction, Mike will point out stuff all the time. And there's a few other people like that, like Mother Horror, and I don't want to get into a big list of people, but there are people who are doing it, but it's an uphill fight to get noticed. If depending on where you've been published initially with these disparate stories, and then expecting to have big sales with your collection, or hoping to have big sales with the actual collection. And then how I was noticing that when I look at the copyright page, a lot of stories do not appear in places that get a lot of views, for example, or clicks or what have you. And my upshot has nothing to do with quality, because the point I was going to make is these collections that I've picked up are award-winning collections, or people that I respect and trust are like, no, this is good. And then you start reading it. Matthew Bartlett, I'm not sure about all of his stuff, but his early collection or two is self-published. And literally it was an uphill battle for me to ever even notice what he was doing. And now I'm like, no, this guy is one of the very best. It doesn't matter where you're published as far as quality, but I'm talking about the uphill battle to get noticed, to get reviewed, to get eyes on your work. I'd like you to talk about that a little bit, because you are actually a counterexample to something. Because I talked about it on social media the other day, Twitter, Facebook, whatever. And I said that a lot of times where you begin, like the old kind of rap song has to, where you end up has a lot to do with where you start. Well, you have kind of bucked that. You have had difficulty getting some of your stories accepted by like the small press or whatever initially when you first were starting, and yet now people are talking about those stories. They're optioning them for movies. You've had New York Times review. This collection here, from what I can tell, really built on sales wise and word of mouth, built on the last one. Talk about that. I'm pretty fascinated. It didn't even hit me, and we're pretty close. I didn't even realize when I was talking about that, you really are one of the exceptions. Somebody who didn't necessarily get published in a lot of big marquee places, and yet here you are, and people are talking about your stuff.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a great answer for the reception that my books have gotten versus the stories. All I can say, the only thing I can think of is I think, and I've actually given this a lot of thought, which is, and I think a lot of writers do this, is they try and figure out where they fit in, where their work fits in to the other work that's out there, to the grand catalog. Because you have you have all these different little subcategories. You have your weird, you have your quiet horror, you have your socio-political horror, you have your, et cetera, et cetera. And it seems like the trend is getting away from sort of the type of stuff that I write, which I kind of think of as traditional horror,
right,
and getting more toward some of the stuff that's new stuff that's being written, which is kind of more, it's very socially heavy, very socio-political. It's very like, there's a lot of like almost like an Aikman resurgence going on from a lot of the things that I've been reading, a lot of the magazines that I've been checking out, where people are more, editors are buying a lot more stuff that's more like weird versus just like, oh, this is just like another ghost story where, people's heads explode at the end, like who cares? So I don't know. So I don't know if it's because of that where I rate my stories to entertain readers. That's my goal. I'm not trying to change the world with a horror story. I'm not trying to get across some giant theme about the political, state of our country or world. I'm not going to, it's not going to be an allegory about global warming. It's, it's just a story. And I tell it in a way that I hope is entertaining, so that when a reader reads, and hopefully, touches the emotions of a reader, or, and gets them emotionally involved with the characters and with what's happening. So that's always kind of that's sort of my thing. That's why I do it. And I enjoy doing that very much. And it's something that I have a lot of fun doing. And it's very gratifying for me when readers enjoy the work. I don't think it necessarily translates to award material. I don't think it translates to editor necessarily material, because I think people are looking for something a little more deep or heavy or whatever. So that's just my like 2 cents knee jerk to kind of what I've experienced. Excuse me. I had to mute my microphone so I wouldn't cough into you guys' ears. But then these stories tend to have an afterlife, I guess. Like a lot of the stories, once they're out in the book form, the collection form, have done very, very well. Like Failsafe is a perfect example. That's a short story that's in Behold the Void. I think I submitted that story to somewhere between 15 and 20 publishers, editors, all of which passed. And I ended up putting it in my collection because it was the story that I believed in. And it's since it was been reprinted in Best Horror. It was reprinted in Nightmare Magazine. It's being optioned for a studio film. So I don't know the answer as to why somebody watch that story, because obviously people like it. I don't.
If I might make an observation, if it's all right, this goes out to not the hardcore writers listening. I mean, but there are every day somebody asks me, this or that about writing, or it's out there. People constantly. One thing that I would say that really strikes me about your path so far, first of all, I don't believe that your stuff doesn't contain political elements or ideological elements. It's just that I get what you're saying, because I think a lot of writers do this across the spectrum. Is that you foreground in other words, the stuff's all in there. Cody foregrounds certain things, you foreground other things, and it doesn't mean that Cody disparages action or whatever when he's foregrounding his C.S. Lewis, Bertrand Russell, dialogue stuff. It doesn't mean that you don't have an engine of political activism somewhere in the background. You are foregrounding the action. But what I have noticed is, because you can't write as humanely as either one of you do and not have these concerns on some level. The thing that I've noticed, though, very key, as it pertains to, okay, I'm a new writer, maybe I'm not even writing a tradition that's popular. I think that's a very interesting observation. We have waves, right? Peaks and valleys, but there's cycles. Right now, certain types of fiction are less, that's just normal, right? I'm sure we could sit down and start breaking it down and delineating the different categories that are like, oh yeah, those are, maybe in 25 years, my bubble gum will become popular again. But right now it's not very popular. One thing that I've noticed, though, that I attribute to some of your success, and this goes out to people listening that are looking for advice, is that you sought advice, you sought, counsel. You already knew what you were, how to write, but you were like, how can I perfect what I'm doing, or how can I improve on it? What is your opinion? And then and I give Scott Nicolay credit as well, because things I've seen firsthand. People that are, innately great writers, and we're sooner or later just going to reach whatever their capability level, their threshold is. But we're both also very avid learners and very good at taking advice. And what I was going to say about that is just that practice, everybody talks about practice being perfect. Practice is not perfect. Perfect practice is perfect. You must practice correctly to improve. But you must know what you're doing to even try. In other words, you got to know what you're doing wrong to actually improve that wrong thing. And I really feel like firsthand watching you do what you've done is as much down to the fact that you learn very quickly and you work really hard. That was something else I should have said in the intro, is that one of the things that about you is not you're prolific, but it's just that you work really hard. They always talk about the hardest working guys in Hollywood. You're one of the hardest working writers.
I've thought that many times. Philip is a very, very
right.
hard worker.
And this is going out to everybody listening. I really think this is super important for people who really, maybe this is what they're listening for. My opinion, and I've helped a lot of writers. I'm friends with behind the scenes with many writers, and we all, Phil, Livy Llewellyn, Nathan Ballingrew, John Langan, editors like Ellen Datlow. I have a little bit of insight into what, some of what they're thinking, some of their process. Phil is one of the great students, and I don't say that like, it's like literally like, oh, he's got so much to learn. No, I mean, we're all students. I don't care if you live to be 90, you are going to be a student until the day you die. He is one of the great students. And it is no small feat to overcome, I'm just going to do a collection of largely original stories and have that. You can sell stuff like that. Anybody can sell anything, but everybody knows who Phil is these days, and he's getting more and more and more recognition. And I put it down to the fact that he just doesn't sit around going, well, when are they going to respond to me with my novel? He has 3 novels in circulation, or 1 in circulation and 2 that are he's editing. He doesn't sit around and go, oh, well, The Dark rejected my story, and what am I going to do? He sends it immediately, and he has 5 more that he's writing. And I know it sounds really simple, but sometimes the simplest things are the most difficult and the most important. And there really is no silver bullet. There's no secret. He simply works hard and is relentless. There's three keys. He works hard, he's relentless, but he also knows what he doesn't know a lot of the time. He'll look at something and go, oh, so you think this is wrong? And then he'll make his interpretation of whether he agrees with that or not. But he is constantly refining his process. And I think that we should all take a lesson from that.
You said that it sounds simple. Oliver Wendell Jones said something to the effect of, I wouldn't give a fig for the simplicity on this side, this side of complexity, but I would give my life for the simplicity on the other side of complexity. I think about that quote a lot, because so many of things in life are simple, but not easy to learn, not easy to practice.
To toss it back to Phil, I don't want to really interrupt that much more. The reason I felt like I should say something is because this has really been a big topic of conversation. It always is. But the last couple of weeks, it's really been coming up on Twitter, and a lot of writers really, struggling writers, because they haven't been published a lot, pulling their hair out over it. and also writers who are great writers who are not getting, necessarily getting the accolades they deserve. Some of this is arbitrary, and there's nothing that any of us could do about it. All I'm saying is that Phil is a really interesting case study of someone who has fought this uphill battle, and and it's not like somebody from Hollywood has rescued him at this point. I mean, there's stuff going on behind the scenes, but the accolades he's receiving and the success that he's having in the small press is at this point 100% just evolving and constantly swimming forward. He doesn't sit around, like waiting for someone to call him. He just keeps working and keeps improving.
If I can interject something, because it's so much more fun to talk about Phil than to hear Phil talk. Sorry.
Cody and I are usually drunk by this point in the conversation.
Yeah.
So that's why we're
actually when we were going to do this, whatever date we were going to do this, Cody's like, "Nah, I don't think you need to tell Phil I'm going to crash onto his interview with you. I'm just going to show up at his house with some alcohol."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Whatever.
Yeah. It didn't work out that way, but I'm trying to beam it. But the other component to that that Phil has schooled so many people like myself who've been in the game so much longer is the aspect of it that so many of us neglect is social media presence, and just getting your voice and your persona out there. I know for myself as a writer, I felt like I should let my work speak for itself and get out and trust that people will find the books and find my voice. And I really have always kind of lagged at blogging and social media presence and being present with with other authors. And I, as good of a student as he is, yeah, Phil's taught me a lot, and I've sought his counsel repeatedly in the last few years to my great benefit, because it's very easy to fall into that trap of thinking, yeah, people are going to find my work. It's like the weather, right? It's inevitable. I just keep putting it in free libraries in my neighborhood and eventually profit. And thus
stapling the pages together and putting them in mailboxes.
Yeah, I very early on in my career, a couple of other writers observed to me, "Yes, you're a writer's writer," and I thought that was a compliment. I didn't realize it was a warning, because a lot of my biggest fans are other writers, but not readers. And the way that you are able to not only maintain this rapport with the larger community of writers, but also with your readers, and the way that you invite them into your life and your process, it is rewarding and empowering for them, I think. And that's another component that can be seemingly deceptively complex, and requires a lot of effort, and you're I think really heroic in that stance, because it doesn't matter how great of a book you read if nobody's aware that it's out there, if nobody is invited in or gets a sense of who you are.
And it's not like 50 years ago. People want it to be real. The reason why people are enjoying this conversation so much is because it's real, it's unfiltered. It's, you've said some things, Cody, that were really unfiltered. You've gone through some hard times lately, so on and so forth. Phil lets people in to his thought process via social media and so forth. I think you're right. I think Phil has that right. I think that's important. I really do.
Agreed. I hope that people are paying attention.
It's been great, you guys. See you later. This is you guys are saying nicer things than I could ever say with myself, so I'm just going to sit here and let it go. I if I could find one of my favorite anecdote that I'd like to tell people about is the time I was working in a warehouse in downtown Los Angeles, and it was 110 degrees, and Laird asked if I had time to jump on the phone to talk about the first horror story I had ever written, and offer some feedback. And I spent the next hour, with Laird, manically taking notes, which I still have, and reference every now and then. And since then, Laird has taught me a lot about what it means to be a professional, and also has pulled me back from the brink of doing things that traps that a lot of young writers fall into. So I owe, which is one of the reasons he got the dedication in the new book, besides being my friend. But yeah, I think, a few things is one of the things that, Laird said to me early on that I think about almost every day is that, the greatest virtue of any writer is perseverance. And that is something that I think about constantly. Whenever I get a rejection or whenever I get down about a project that I'm on because it's not going, whatever's not working out the way I want to work it out, I put the blinders on and I push forward and I keep writing and I keep sending stuff out and I keep working and because I know it's about perseverance. And it's about
that goes
for
any creative endeavor.
Yeah, I mean, it's and what I call, I refer to as making the donuts. It's like it's easy to spend a lot of your emotional time and energy worrying about the rejections you got, or worrying about your career, or worrying about things that you are out of your control. When things get really hard for me, this is something I had to learn. This is not something I knew instinctively. I had to learn it over the course of years, when I started doing this, is when things get really, when things really bum me out on the stuff I can't control, I really focus very hard on the stuff I can control. I focus on the story that I'm writing, and that's like, I put all my energy and all my focus into that story, and I let whatever else is going to happen. And that's been the biggest benefit to me in rough times, that and calling Larry and crying on his shoulder about stuff, but is just really staying focused on the work. It sounds simplistic, as we've said.
I was about to say, it's really one of those simple things that's such great advice that you're giving, that only if you can't control something, don't worry about it. Worry about the stuff you can control.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bummer. Look, and I announced my publishing deal for the book that's coming out next summer, and which isn't a huge press, but it's a nice press. It's it's a mid-list press or whatever. And but I was excited about it. And some guy messaged me and he was like, what advice would you give a young writer trying to succeed in publishing, but that doesn't have all the context and connections that you have? And I was like, what context and connections? You mean the publisher of this guy who's the 23rd guy who read that book and finally said yes? The other 22 guys aren't, that's how you get contacts. That's how you get connections. It's always the, it's the 16th or 23rd or 53rd guy you shove that story in front of, who says yes. And now he's a contact, and that's how you get the contacts, and that's how you get the connections in the industry. The stories that I've optioned have nothing to do with the fact that I live in Los Angeles, and have nothing to do with the fact that I work in the film industry. They have nothing to do with the fact that I've written screenplays that have been produced.
I thought it all had to do with the fact that you once dug a grave for Christopher Walken.
No. The Christopher Walken story is just an anecdote. Okay. No, that's just a life moment. But it comes from just me sending out stories, and a guy read a story and he liked it, and he wanted to show it to another guy who works in film TV development, and that guy liked it, and and it all went that way. So it's just me sending out stories. So I think the easiest thing to tell people as far as advice, maybe this answers Laird's original question, is for me personally, I just work as hard as I can. I take advice from everywhere. I love advice. I fucking love advice. I like writers who don't like people telling them what they should do to their work, frankly, are not getting it. Because you still have you're still the writer. It's still your decision. You can take one out of 20 things that somebody says to you, but that one thing is going to make your story better. The other 19 things maybe you don't agree with, and that's up to you, because it's your vision. But I love hearing feedback about my work, and I love applying the things that I go, oh yeah, that's a great idea, or that's a great thought. And to Laird's point, you have to listen to advice, but you have to seek advice, but you also have to listen to that advice. And I think, going back to the question at the beginning of this podcast, which was Laird asked the difference between Behold the Void and Beneath the Pale Sky, what differentiates the two. And I think what differentiates them the most is Beneath the Pale Sky, for the most part, is how I write after learning a lot about writing, a lot more about writing. And, you know, I was even talking to Paul Tremblay the other day, and I sent him a note, which I don't think he won't mind me sharing. I sent him a note saying, your work has really been inspirational to me in the sense that you take risks. You do things that a lot of writers don't do, the way you know, Laird and I were talking about Paul just the other day, like he's a technician, and I think in the most positive sense. He does things with the way he structures a story, like physically on the page, even to some degree, and also just the way he builds his stories. That's been a big influence on a lot of the stories that I've written. There's a story in Beneath the Pale Sky called ID, which is in a lot of ways kind of like my sort of Paul Tremblay homage. I take some of the lessons that he taught me. Cody, I've learned lessons from reading.
Take note of that, readers, if you haven't read this yet.
And also, it's not just asking people for advice. It's also reading different voices. And reading Cody's work gives you an idea of how you can channel frenetic energy and a ballpark worth of ideas into a cohesive narrative, and do it well, and do it funny, and make it scary, and all those things. And like Josh Malerman has taught me, reading Josh Malerman stuff has taught me how to keep a story moving, you know, like liquid through a reader's mind, you know. And not to continue to praise Laird, but Laird's work is probably the most paramount to what I've taken and learned from, as far as just the actual work itself, forgetting the things he's told me. But there's no greater stylist, I don't think, currently than Laird, as far as just the pure writing side of things. And so I've learned a lot just reading, and I read poetry that Laird's turned me on some poets, and I read a lot of I'm reading, you know, a lot of poetry, and just the way the words are constructed. And I take, those are all lessons. Everything to me is a lesson, or at least has the potential to be a lesson. I read for pleasure, but I'm also always thinking about what am I reading that I find that I could maybe apply a little bit to my own work, that would make my own work just a little bit better, or open up a little more of a window into some things that I could do. Ralph Robert Moore is an influence I talk about a lot, who has such a visceral way of storytelling. And I actually learned recently, he posted about it on Facebook, and I never even knew this about him, is that he storyboards a lot of his stories, which I thought was fascinating, and probably explains a lot of why I feel that way about his work, where he literally storyboards out the actions and the sequences, or at least some of them, and then before he writes it down, he wants to see how visually it plays out. And I thought that was really interesting. So things like that are things you pick up. You just got to keep your ears open, and you got to be willing to be a sponge, you know. And I think that for me, that's what, I guess, those are things that have maybe have a little bit more success in some areas, or with the books versus whatever, I don't know. But I do take those lessons to heart, and I love it. Like that for me, that's the joy of writing, is learning and becoming a better writer, becoming a little bit better at doing things, so that as you progress, you're a better storyteller, and you're also flexing your own muscle. You're doing things that are uncomfortable. So just, Larry and I've talked about it, different, writing in different styles, writing certain stories in a pulp style, writing certain stories in a modern style, and that, to me, that's really fascinating. I love playing with, different styles of writing, and using different prose for different things. Sometimes I'm, I've been accused of being a little purple on one side of the spectrum, and on the other side of the spectrum, maybe people feel like it reads too fast. So I don't know. And I cater the writing style to the story. The story is always the priority. And sometimes it just comes down to, how do I want to tell this story? And that's something that I think about a lot before I begin something. Is I always think about, what is the tone of this piece? What is the style I want to tell it in? Is it, the Sabbath stories, the small town stuff? are definitely kind of throwback. I kind of write in the style of, you know, the 80s, you know, the McCammons and the Bradburys of the world, and the Charles Grants or whatever. And I think when I try and write something that's more contemporary, I probably write it in a little more contemporary style. And sometimes, you know, so again, I just I'm very focused on the craft. I take a lot of joy from writing prose. I take a lot of joy from a well-written sentence. And I really like learning about writing from great writers. That's like the one takeaway, I guess, if I were giving a takeaway for anyone listening, new writers or whoever, is ask and then listen and then apply, you know, because it'll make you, and don't be afraid of feedback. You know, feedback is writer's gold. Just don't feel like if somebody tells you to do something that you have to do it, but maybe they're going to tell you something you weren't aware of or you weren't thinking about, or maybe they have a better way to do something. And that not only is that something that you apply to that story, it's something you apply for every story you write from that point forward. And I mean, I don't know, to me it seems ridiculous that people, you know, are almost, you know, aren't comfortable with that idea, because for me it's the best part of what I do.
Absolutely. Cody just signaled that he has to hit the trail.
Thank you for being here, Cody.
Oh yeah, thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure and a privilege. But yeah, I got to catch a flight.
All right.
But yeah, I really appreciate the questions and the wisdom. I always learn a lot more than I offer when I come on this show. Thanks.
The Flying Nun, people, NONE, pick it up, and the rest of.
Thank you, Cody. It's nice to see you after we haven't seen each other in a while. Good to see you again.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, we should meet up again soon. All of us. Yeah. And if Flying Nun's too cerebral for you, Werewolves in a Traffic Jam, everybody, Gridlocked, coming out in ebook soon.
Okay.
All right.
No weapons on the plane. I just wanted to remind you.
Shit. Oh yeah. I'm gonna be the next hour patting myself down. I'm gonna be naked in the world. All right, hockey in the streets, snowman in the sheets.
See you, Cody.
Take care, everybody. Bye.
Have a safe trip.
Thanks.
Can I spend about 5 more minutes with you two, if that's all right?
Well, I just wanted to respond to, because I hate to cut Phil off there because I want to respond to some of that, but I also want to say goodbye to Cody. Cody is. You know, I've gotten drunk with that guy, so that was nice. It's nice to see him again. This is who he is. Mm-hmm. This is who he's been, and a great writer.
He's real,
and he's really a fascinating. You know, for years when I went to conventions, this was the only reason I went to them, is to hang out with Cody and John Langan and Paul Tremblay, because people, you know, we didn't have this kind of the Zoom or Skype or Google as much until the last few years, maybe the last 8 or 9 years. Right. But so that first 10 years I was writing, maybe even up to 12 or 14, I didn't get to talk to people unless you know, I went to see them. But this makes me you know, kind of yearn for that or pine for that a little bit. But to go back to what you were talking about, Phil, one of the observations that I kind of get from all that, and just, you know, I'm sitting here, I'm just kind of cogitating, is that we were talking, you and I we had a conversation recently, and I was sort of musing about the different types of writers. And I know that there's a spectrum, but there are essentially, for me, I can kind of categorize observationally sort of into a couple camps. Of big camps, and the writers that I kind of consider outside in writers, they basically come from without the self, and they are very clinical. Doesn't mean that they don't have empathy or can't. I mean, everybody has, I think, has overlapping, you know, emotional sort of abilities or interest or whatever, intelligence. But primarily, there are people who are technicians, and there are people who I think are almost empathic writers. And that's like you could, you know, in other words, there's a lot of other elements to them. So I wouldn't want to pigeonhole them, but those are their like defining characteristics. And I look at Cody, and you actually said something. I was kind of smiling because he is a channeler. That's not to say that he can't be cold, calculated, and plot it all out. Of course he can. He's a writer. You have to diagram stuff. But his primary engine, I wish he was here to talk about it, is empathic. It comes from within. He has to literally all the stuff that he receives, he has to channel it into something narratively coherent. So he's constantly working with that.
Yeah.
You and Paul, and you're more in the center as far as I'm concerned, but you and Paul both have similarities that you are technical and you approach writing as a puzzle to put together more so. Structure. Everybody does structure. It's just that some people do structure almost blindly, almost like Jackson Pollock doing abstract or doing, it's abstract in some way, and it all makes sense later. With you and Paul, there's a whole lot of I'm going to diagram it before I write it. Whether you do it internally or whether you write it down, the pieces fit together. You're constantly taking the puzzle pieces and you're making them work. I don't know if that's really anything, how pertinent it is as far as advice goes, because this is not an advice show. We're just chatting, but it is interesting to note. And it's something that that goes right along with influence, and modes of and interests, right? Like, in other words, you're influenced by Ligotti, but you also like to write weird fiction. I think it's also important to know what kind of writer you are, how you're going to express that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the word that popped into my head is pacing, which sounds like a technical word, which is a technician's word, but it's actually incredibly important to me when I'm writing a short story or a novel. And we kind of talked about this with, like, when you put together a story collection, it's all about I guess pacing was the word I might have been looking for earlier too, talking about that.
We were talking about pacing,
Yeah, I think pacing is important to not. There's no strict regimen in which to follow, but I do think you should have an idea of what the pacing of your story is, so if nothing else, it's consistent. And yeah, I'm a huge outliner when it comes to novels, especially, and because I never want to think about where I'm going when I'm writing. I want to just write, and I want to already know what I'm doing next. And that'll change as I'm writing the book. Characters do things you don't necessarily foresee them doing, or situations you come up with on the fly will maybe alter the course of your story. But I don't want to end a chapter and then be like, okay, what happens now? And I'm going to, like, spend the next 3 days thinking about it. I just want to keep going. And I feel like I think for me, that's why I like outlining, especially when it comes to novels. With short stories, I'm a little more of a pantser, I guess. I do always know where I'm going. I always know how a story ends before I start it. But I don't always know how I'm going to get there. That will, in a story, you have a little more flexibility. But again, it comes back to your point, I guess. It comes back to pacing, but it comes back to just also, unfortunately, it's not really that helpful, but unfortunately, it's kind of like feel, right? It's just just having it's like painting, an abstract painting to a degree. It's like you just get a feel for how the colors are going to go and how you want it to look, and how the balance is going to be, and it's just kind of like a feel thing. And for me, so yeah, I think I'm kind of a weird hybrid, I guess, of, like, I'm very structured. My screenplay experience has taught me that. I'm a big fan of, like, having all the beats lined up for a story before I write it. But I also like just going by feel. I like letting it be fluid to a degree. As long as I'm not taking myself off as long as the train's not completely leaving the tracks, I like to see how things go, and I like to let it, give it some breathing room, and let the characters do stuff they might not do. The novel I just finished, that I'm going to turn in next week. Interestingly, I have the outline for that novel is 3 pages of very specific beats with very specific notes. And I know because it's a mystery thriller, so I really wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing structure wise. But about 2/3 of the way through that book, the main character just started doing things that I was absolutely not expecting her to do, and I kind of went with it. I wasn't real thrilled about it, but I kind of went with it, and I went and told my wife I was like, I gotta refigure the rest of the book now, because Kate, the main character, just kind of went a different direction on me, and so that does happen. But yeah, again, I think it's just feel. I guess it's just knowing when to let your subconscious just roll with it and see what comes up, and then sometimes it's like, it is a little bit more of a technical exercise. With ID, I mentioned earlier, that's a story where I tried, I don't know if it was effective, but I tried very hard to create atmosphere and mood via the way I presented the story, and literally physically presented it to the reader as part of their experience. And so I don't know. So it's fun to play with those things, right? It's fun to experiment and try different things. But yeah, it's kind of a combination, I guess, of like technicality and mechanics and just like and feeling, letting the story guide you and kind of going with your gut a little bit.
Well, as we have discussed, I've discussed this with Lang, and I've discussed this with Mike to some degree. There's a difference between, art is a combination of mechanics and intuition, and what you're talking about, pacing. It's like comedy. I really admire stand-up comedians, and I know that they practice their craft. Well, and they practice their craft, right? And they have mentors.
Yeah.
No one can teach you timing. You can demonstrate it. Look at Robin Williams' timing here. But if anyone's ever looked at the spectrum of people who tell jokes and go, two people can tell the same filthy joke and everybody will laugh at one, and both of them can be fairly competently, reciting this joke. But somebody who has better timing, everybody laughs despite, like, oh, that's so naughty. But, Uncle Bill, he's funny. Where if you tell it, they're all just looking bug-eyed, like, really. Right. A lot of that is intuition. You can't teach it. I was discussing this with I think a writing guy or a professor, a instructor type, and he was, I think, a little bit offended because he said, "I think you can teach timing," and I'm like, "Prove it." You can't teach intuition. I think you can illustrate it. I think you can point it out, but I think it applies to all kinds of artistic or sports endeavors. In other words, they'll say you can't teach instincts. You can teach how to hit the line if you're a running back. You can teach the different movements of the line. You can diagram the plays. You can't teach him to see the hole that opens up out of the corner of his eye and to pivot that direction. We were talking about Barry Sanders, I think. You cannot teach the empathic or intuitive, which are very, I think, inextricably linked. You can't teach that. I think that is a fundamental concept of art. Nope, that's enough. Right. That's enough red. Well, why is it enough red? I couldn't tell. It's enough red. It's enough. Yeah.
And what I'd add to that is, I think that's why I think, and you and I were talking about voice before, how, some writers have very specific voices. And that's why a big thing for me is when writers ask me my advice is I say, be true to your voice. And I think the two go together, because if you're true to your voice, your inner instincts are going to guide you. If you're working outside of your comfort zone voice-wise and you're trying to be something you're not, your instincts are going to fail you, and you're not going to really understand what you're not going to have an inherent emotional, empathetic idea of what you're constructing. It's going to be more of more something that you're kind of like, building outside yourself. So I think very important. And there's no such thing as an original story, right? How many times have you and I said that? But there's telling the same story a different way, and there's telling the same story your way. And and I think when you believe in your voice, you're going to find readership, because readers don't want to read the same story they've already read 20 times. They want to read something that you wrote. They want to read your voice. They want to read something unique that only you can really provide them. And
the book that you would have wanted to read that's not out there.
Yeah, and I think that's where things like instinct and feel and all this kind of like more ephemeral stuff, or ethereal stuff we're talking about, I think comes to play, because I think when you're true to yourself, those things will naturally appear, and you'll have a better understanding of like what do you want to achieve with the story you're telling.
Well, and that's the problem, is that with always looking for the secret, is that you can only achieve that through trial and error. And some people reach it more quickly, like you, I think, have reached it really quickly. Other people, it takes a long time. And the only thing I would add to that is writing outside your comfort zone, where you're talking about, you don't necessarily have empathic sort of connection to it. I actually think that's important to do as an exercise. It goes back to strengthening the muscles, because when you strengthen what you're not good at, or at least explore what you're not so the areas that you're not so strong, you can never be strong enough in your so-called strength. I learned this from lifting weights and doing martial arts, running dogs. I don't care. Somebody once asked me, well, how, I don't want to get too strong. I just want to be strong enough. He was talking about lifting in conjunction with self-defense. And I said, how strong is that? How strong is strong enough? What are you strong? You're strong enough now. You're a UPS driver. You weigh 220 pounds. And you have your health. You're in the peak of your health. Will you still be strong enough when you're 70 and you have, emphysema? Or maybe you lost an arm, or you have diabetes? And his eyes, you just, the point being is, you're strong enough for what? So I feel like when you go outside your comfort zone, it makes more explicit what your strengths are. You will appreciate your strengths more, and it will reinforce them. So I think it's all worth doing.
Yeah. I'd like to point out something and then finish up with you telling people what Commodore is about, Philip.
Yes.
But the last 10 to 15 minutes, you guys have been talking about writing, and there's two components to this, what you were talking about. And then also at the very beginning, Philip, when you said, and you mentioned this too, Laird, about being asked, how do you make it? How do you get contacts? Blah, blah, blah. I think one of the things that you do is not be an island to yourself. There's other writers out there. There's other creative people out there that you need to push up. You need to promote. You need to read their work. And then another one of those things that sounds so damn simple, but don't compare yourself to others. I mean, let's look at a man who is an absolute genius, Michael Sisko. And how many people know his name outside of our limited genre? But he deserves to be more well known. And I hope he is someday. But I read a story one time about a writer. It was actually an audio drama, and he had this cult following, and he was doing okay. And but he was like in his mid 40s, and he was like, I've been writing for 20 years, 25 years. I'm just never going to make it to that next level. Long story short, not to bore you guys, but at the end of the episode, he realizes that it's not about getting to the next level. It's not about being Stephen King or whatever level that is. It's about the fact that the people who are reading him really love what he's doing. Remember that. Whatever you're doing, whether it's a writer, whether it's a podcaster, I have a lot of numbers, but you know what? I'd love 100,000 downloads an episode. Probably never going to get it, but I do know that the people who listen to me, I get so many notes about how, man, this podcast helped get me through the pandemic. I'm sure you guys have gotten notes about this book. I had a bad day, and this book really took me away from that, and so on and so forth. That's important. Money's important too. Man, if somebody wants to hand me $1 million, believe me, I'm not going to reject it. But everybody's on a different journey. Don't compare yourself to others. Do your best. Learn from what you're doing wrong, whatever creative endeavor you're in. Podcasting, artist, writer, whatever. Stand-up comedian, like you said. Learn from what you're doing wrong and keep doing right what you're doing right, and try to strengthen those strengths. So I don't know.
Indeed.
So tell us about Commodore, Philip.
Okay.
Kelly Young published this, and we really pushed it, and this was the initial really deluxe edition, but there will be more, right?
Yeah. This is, can you hear me okay, by the way?
Yes. Yep.
Because one of my earbuds died. But anyway, yeah, this is the deluxe edition. Looks like it's got the dust jacket, and then the trade edition will have a different artwork. And it's a gorgeous book. It's got like 5 original drawings in it by an artist named Brian Vox, who's an incredibly talented dude, and he did such an amazing job with this. And so so Strange Hands is putting it out. It's I think the hardcovers that were they're already sold out, unfortunately, but the people who pre-ordered the hardcovers, those will be coming out in September. And then I think the trade edition will be coming out soon thereafter. So like, just give you an idea, it's really got knockout artwork. For those who aren't on video, I apologize, I'm showing a picture. But yeah, so I'm excited for that. And Commodore is sort of a Commodore is a prequel to a story I wrote called Soda Jerk, which is in actually in the new collection, Beneath the Pale Sky. It's a bit of an older story though. It was originally published with Shiloh, as you know, Mike. You published it, and so this is a sort of a prequel to that story, and it's sort of an expansion of that universe, the Sabbath universe, and it's a lot of fun. It's very pulpy. It's very old school horror, and actually it was I think Laird read it early on, and it was one of talk about taking advice. So originally this story was called Black Car, and Laird's like, maybe think about going with something else and tying it to maybe sort of like the car, because the car is the main character is the car, which is like this sort of like portal to other worlds in the worst possible ways. So the story is about some kids who live in Sabbath, and they hear about this car where if you go into the car, if you find the car and go into the car, it's an old junker in a junkyard. If you can find this car they call the Black Car, there are kids, there are kids who have found it and have never been heard from again. So it's kind of like this local folklore and these kids try and find the Black Car, and then what happens to them once they do.
Oh, I love that idea. I haven't read it yet, but Kelly's got one on the way for me for promoting the first edition.
Okay,
I can't wait to read it.
All I can say is I read it. So I haven't read the final, whatever version now, but I've read it, after you'd edited, gone over it a bit. And I'm going to say it's quintessentially Fracassi. It's not like somebody else, but he says, if you like Lansdale in a certain mode, small town mode, if you like, there might even be a tiny bit of Ray Bradbury, Matheson, Stephen King for sure.
From a Buick
and maybe even a little bit of Carl Edward Wagner. It's unlike them, but it's redolent of them. Yeah. There's certain, like, in other words, there's just certain flavors that are whiffs or whatever. But those are some. If you like those writers, if you like Lansdale and Wagner and King and McCammon, you're going to enjoy this story. This is because it's almost an homage to those, to that sort of 70s and 80s, I guess more 80s small town horror and what that's capable of.
And I want to see what a group effort I know that this has been. Now the writer, point blank, is the most important component. Okay, but that is wonderful art. This is a wonderful addition. Kelly has told me numerous times how he's worked his ass off on this book, and I look forward to it. It's a treat. It looks like a real treat.
A lot of scotch went into the creation of this book.
But you just said something, Mike. The bottom line is, in my experience, sometimes you just get lucky, but artists have a tendency to bring their A game if they like what they read. So, or enthused by either they haven't read it, but are enthused by the concept. And I can tell you this, so it's usually not a coincidence that good stuff gets good art.
Yeah. I was going to say this before Laird said that, I swear, but I was going to say I've been lucky with artists in my short career. Everyone from Heather Landry, who did Behold the Void, and
Heather Landry, Google her, guys. She is a wonderful artist.
Yeah, what's her thing? Sandpaper Daisy art.
Sandpaper Daisy, yeah.
And I did and then Glenn Chadbourne did Boys in the Valley. Francois Valancourt, who did the amazing. I mean, this is what Francois created. I mean, mind blowing. Artwork.
You'll never write a carousel again, or a fair, whatever that is.
Yeah, and this is Glenn Chadbourne. Okay.
Boys in the Valley.
Yeah, this is Glenn. Glenn Chadbourne did the cover art. So this is the novel that's coming out on Halloween. This is the arc of it, not the actual novel's a hardcover. But yeah, so I feel like I've been really fortunate. Brian Vox, of course, VOX, did Commodore. And I got to work with artist Mark Licari on my book of poetry that's coming out. And I'm working with Luke Spooner on a children's book next year. So I love, it's very humbling for me to have all the amazing talent, these talented artists creating this wonderful work. I did a podcast about a week ago, and someone asked, where did you come up with the idea of the Ferris wheel in the water for the cover of your book? And I'm like, I didn't come up with that. Francois Valancourt came up with that. He read like 4 or 5 of the stories, and he pitched it. It was his idea. It's 100%. So it's a lot of gratitude on my end to work with really talented people to create the packaging. Because I'll tell you something else. People who tell you the cover of a book isn't important.
Wrong.
That's not true.
I've been studying promotion for
pay for a good cover.
almost 30 years. Yeah. And it is important. The title's important.
Yeah.
The cover's important. Because that's what gets them to look inside.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've been fortunate with that. I've been fortunate where Laird wrote the introduction to Behold the Void. Josh Mailman wrote the introduction to Beneath the Pale Sky. Those are gateway names for a new writer like me. And I've been very, very, we talked a lot about hard work and perseverance and that stuff. I've also been very, very lucky. I've been very, very fortunate. I do believe there's an element of creating your own luck, which is a lot of times the outcome of working hard and getting yourself out there and putting your work in as many places as you can. But I've also been just straight up lucky. And real quick, I wanted to say that too, is because I think it's important, is don't be afraid to reach out to people, and don't be afraid to get your work in front of influential people, editors, publishers, other authors. I think people assume that they're going to be, there's going to be blockades, in front of those gateways, and most often there's not. I've sent, I don't know how many books to editors and publishers and who I've never published with, and I probably never will, or I've never, been anthologized by, and I probably never will. But I work really hard on getting my work out there. I don't.
Be respectful in that contact, but if you never ask, the answer is always no.
Yeah, always ask. I mean, be respectful.
Yes. Yeah.
Be nice.
I mean, it doesn't mean you have to kiss your ass, but just realize, keep it short. If you're going to write an email to somebody, keep it short. Somebody influential, keep it short and say, hey, I know you're busy. Really would love if you took a look at this. If you can't, no worries.
Yeah.
You're going to get a lot of no's, but you are going to get some yeses too.
Yeah.
But again, I'll say, if you don't ask, it will always be no. So, you mentioned Francis Valancourt before we go. I was lucky enough to, I told Stuart Onan how much of a fan I am of the Night Country, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Paul goes, send him some swag. Send him some swag. Stuart loves swag. So, I sent him some swag. And the other day in the mail, I get the Night Country, the limited edition. It's got a new introduction by Stuart Onan. It's got an afterword by some guy by the name of Paul Tremblay. And
Tremblay. Or Tremblay. Tremblay. I'm sorry, it's Tremblay.
Tremblay, yes. And illustrated by Francis Valancourt.
Francois.
I'm going to post pictures. I'm going to ask Stuart first, but I'm going to post pictures on social media in the next couple of days. But oh my God, it's beautiful. And even if you can't get I know there's going to be more of them. This was just the initial.
Yeah, I got ordered one of those too. Hasn't come.
Yeah, and it's not on Kindle to my knowledge, but you can still get the original, used copies on Amazon. It's a hell of a, it's a love story to Halloween, to Ray Bradbury, to, well, just, look it up and read it. You'll know what I mean.
He's an interesting guy, right? Because he isn't, not all of his stuff is, he's gonna slipstream a little bit with what he writes. Like, it's not all.
Yeah, it's all different. Yeah.
It's like every book he writes is like he's kind of attacking a different.
Yeah.
He's somebody that I should mention more often. He's super good.
Yeah.
Like a
I
really, just really great writer.
Yeah, I can't recommend The Night Country enough. And it's signed by Stewart, signed by Francis Valancourt, and it's also signed by Paul Tremblay. Hopefully that won't bring the value down too much, but it's signed by Paul too. So he's gonna kill me if he ever listens to this. So, but it is beautiful. So, and thank you, Paul.
Levidian. I think the publisher was Levidian, I think.
Yes, that's correct. Yes, Levidian. And my cat, I'll have to tell Levidian, my cat immediately enjoyed the box. So, which is most important. So yeah, The Night Country, and in the spirit of mentioning other people, like Laird said, collection, if you haven't read Dark Blood Comes from the Feet by Emma J. Gibbon, all I can say is you really should. This podcast here is about Cody, and it's about Philip Fracassi, and you should read Laird Barron books too. But I just wanted to mention her.
Dark Blood Comes from the Feet as the name.
What a hell of a title!
I love that. I have not read it yet because I'm still, but that's one on my list, and just exclusively because of the title. I got.
That's what I told Emma. I had her on the podcast. I said, Emma, this is like one when you walk past it in the bookstore or the virtual bookstore, and the title is like Dark Blood Comes from the Feet. You're like, I gotta pull that out and see what that is.
Yeah.
For no other reason than it's accurate. I can tell you.
Cover art.
Yeah. So please read Dark Blood Comes from the Feet. I do have links to Philip Fracassi and Cody Goodfellow books. If they couldn't get the limited edition of Commodore, when can they get the next edition, Philip?
Yeah, the trade edition, I think Strange Eons is doing a paperback and a ebook. I don't know if they're doing an audio book or not. I don't know. But they're definitely doing paperback and ebook. I think they're coming at the same time. The hardcover. I think once the hardcover is done, then they'll have the other stuff available on Amazon and stuff like that. And
you keep sending Kelly whiskey. It'll get done faster. So
yeah, I think that there's been some production out of their control, production related issues.
Yeah, he is pretty frustrated at something that happened, but he got it fixed, I think.
Right. Yeah.
Oh God, he was pissed. He was texting me about it. I'm like, those fucking idiots.
Yeah, and also
a lot of challenges in small press publishing, folks.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's a labor of love, 100%.
It is.
And as you know,
he's like, I'm making no money on this book. I'm doing this because I really believe in Philip. I really believe in this edition of this book and these illustrations, and I love Kelly Young, but I gotta applaud him for that too. So.
It's their first foray into book publishing, so it's exciting to be part of that. I think the plan is to do for them. I think their plan is to do more books. So although after they do this one, they may not want to anymore after how much headache it's caused them. But yeah, I'm excited for that to come out, and I think it's a really fun story. Again, I think it's just cause it's old, to Laird's point. It's throwback old school horror, man. It's nose to the grindstone.
Yeah.
Beneath the Pale Sky is available now, if I remember correctly.
Beneath the Pale Sky is available now.
So why don't you guys start with that, speaking to the audience, and and then go from there. The Flying Nun is a very quick read, and then other Cody Goodfellow books. He's a trip. Laird, what's the next book you have coming out, man?
I don't have anything coming out right now. I'm working on a collection and a novel, so it'll be a bit. I have various stories coming out. So
right.
Nothing to worry about.
Your last book was the third in the trilogy.
Right. It was Worse Angels.
Yeah.
So
the Isaiah Coleridge books. If you haven't picked those up, folks, please do. And I believe those are available in Kindle and Audible as well.
They are.
They're everywhere.
The Audible is really particularly entertaining.
Did Dark Side read those too, or was
no? It was in-house. Random House did the.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Demerit, William Demerit does it, and just really great. He, as far as I'm concerned, he's the voice of Coleridge.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
Yeah, that trilogy: Blood Standard, Black Mountain, Worse Angels. That's a fucking great trilogy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Of horror crime that everybody should read. Laird's the kind of guy where you're like, just start anywhere in a way, but those novels are a lot of fun.
Yeah. And I'd really like to see a fourth one. So please, everyone, go and buy all three of these immediately. So
go forth and purchase.
Go forth and purchase. It's not that I want you to spend your money to help the Laird Barron economy, but I want you to spend your money to help the Laird Barron economy. So anyway, this has been one of the longest podcasts I've done in a while, and it's just flown by. I really love you guys. Thanks for being here, Laird. Thanks for being here, Philip.
Thanks for asking me to come on. I really wanted to chat with these two.
Yeah.
It's been fun having Laird on. That was unexpected, so that was a very nice bonus.
Yeah, he has a future in podcasting. I'll tell you that. So he made my job very easy today, and he had some really great questions. So, and Cody's not here, but thanks to Cody for being here as well. And I'm sorry, Philip, that I was really sick that Sunday, but I hope I've made it up with today. So to promote.
It's never a bad time to promote one's books.
Right.
No bad time for a good review.
All right.
No, Mike, it's no worries, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks everybody for watching and listening. For the Patreons, Laird and I had a very chilling conversation 2 weeks ago about strange but creepy stories that have happened to him. And I'm not just saying that. The people who have watched that video have said that as well. And I will have the audio up in the next day or two. I'll tag Laird on Twitter, and I'll let the Patreons know. This is just $5 a month. So just Google Lovecraft eZine Patreon, or I've got a link in the live chat here if you're watching the live chat. So guys, thanks for being here. And I know I'll be talking to both of you soon. And thanks for listening, folks.